Byrgenwerth is one of the most quietly devastating places in all of Bloodborne, and today we are going through 411 Easter eggs, secrets, and hidden details buried inside its walls, its lore, its characters, and the horrifying legacy it left on every single corner of Yharnam. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. I put this video together because Byrgenwerth kept pulling me back. Every time I thought I had understood it, I found something else. A line of dialogue that recontextualized a boss. An item description tucked into a corner that completely changed how I read a character. I spent a long time assembling this, and one of the deliberate choices I made was to lead with the human stories first, before the cosmic horror. Byrgenwerth is terrifying, but it started with people. Scholars. Students. A man who wanted to reach God, and a man who wanted to stop him. I thought that grounding mattered. So that is where we begin. Chapter 1. The College at the Edge of the Lake. Willem founded Byrgenwerth as a centre of academic inquiry. It was not originally a place of blood rituals or forbidden gods. It was a school. That detail is easy to miss when you are standing in its decaying hallways, fighting spider creatures and trying not to die. The name Byrgenwerth itself has been passed by the community for years. The prevailing reading connects it to Old English roots, suggesting something like a guarded enclosure or a fortified place of learning. That reading fits. This was always meant to be a place where dangerous knowledge was kept in and kept away from the world. Master Willem appears in the game as an almost completely silent figure. He sits in a wheelchair at the edge of a cliff overlooking Moonside Lake. He says almost nothing, but the game tells you everything about him through items, architecture, and the people who once followed him. The chair that Willem sits in is not a random prop. Chairs in Bloodborne carry weight. They represent stasis, immobility, and the inability to act. Willem, the man who set everything in motion, ends his story unable to move. The railing Willem grips has been worn smooth. That is a texture detail. Someone modelled the wear pattern on that railing to suggest years of the same person holding the same spot. It implies Willem has been sitting there a very long time. The view from Willem's chair looks directly over the water toward the Moonside Lake and the presence of Rom below. Whether or not Willem knows Rom is down there is one of the most interesting unresolved questions in the game. Provost Willem's in-game description calls him a scholar who sought to partake of the wisdom of the Great Ones. But it also notes that he believed the eye to be the organ of the gods. That belief shaped every decision he ever made. The eye rune found near Byrgenwerth depicts an eye. Its description reads, Master Willem had an epiphany. He, who had sought the old blood, forsook it, opting instead for the vitreous humour of eyes. This is the moment Byrgenwerth pivoted from blood to eyes, and it changed everything. The vitreous humour is the gel inside an eyeball. Willem believed that by accumulating eyes, by literally having more eyes on and inside your body, a person could develop insight, could begin to perceive things beyond human comprehension. This is where Bloodborne distinguishes itself from other cosmic horror games. It does not just say the knowledge drives you mad. It provides a mechanism. More eyes equals more perception. More perception equals contact with the outer world. And contact with the outer world equals transformation. The Byrgenwerth campus layout is deliberately designed to funnel you upward and inward. You enter from the outside, pass through gardens, move through the building, and end at the lecture hall at the back. The architecture is guiding you toward the secret Willem kept at the end. The locked front gate of Byrgenwerth can only be opened with a key found in the Forbidden Woods. That connection is intentional. The woods are the barrier between Yharnam and Byrgenwerth, and the game makes you walk through danger before you are allowed in. The trees in the Forbidden Woods are enormous and ancient. Several community members have noted that the scale of those trees is not consistent with normal forests. They suggest something happened in that area, some kind of growth acceleration tied to the arcane energies of the lake. The spider enemies inside Byrgenwerth wear scholar robes. They are the failed students, the ones who sought more eyes and got them, but not in the way they intended. Their transformation is the nightmare version of Willem's dream. One of the most painful details about the spider scholars is that they still behave like scholars. They move cautiously. They react to light. Several of their movement patterns resemble someone reading or examining something closely. The intelligence is still there, twisted. The lanterns inside Byrgenwerth are still lit. Someone is keeping them on, or they have been burning so long they cannot go out. Either reading is unsettling. The furniture inside Byrgenwerth is largely intact. Unlike many places in Yharnam that have been smashed and looted and burned, Byrgenwerth feels abandoned rather than destroyed. People left. They did not flee in panic. They walked out. Several desks inside Byrgenwerth still have open books on them. The books are not readable by the player, but they are present. Whoever was sitting at those desks left mid-study. There is a specific room in Byrgenwerth with a large circular window. The window faces toward the lake. The circular shape echoes the eye motif throughout the building, and the lake visible through it suggests the scholars were always oriented toward what lay beneath the water. The circular window also frames the moon on certain in-game conditions. Whether that is intentional or coincidental has been debated, but given how intentional Bloodborne's design is in other areas, it seems unlikely to be accidental. The rafters in Byrgenwerth's main hall contain several hanging objects that are difficult to see without adjusting the brightness. Community members with high contrast setups have identified what appear to be desiccated remains. Students who never left. Byrgenwerth contains a second floor accessible only by ladder. The second floor has fewer enemies but more readable environmental details. The density of notes and scattered items up there suggests it was the more private working space for senior scholars. The ladder itself is interesting. In a building full of staircases and architectural intentionality, the second floor of one section is accessible only by a wooden ladder. It feels deliberately casual, like a space that was added and never properly integrated. A private addition. There is a chest near the top of the building that contains the empty phantasm shell. Its description mentions phantasms as lower great ones, and the shell is described as having been stripped of its life. That item sitting inside Byrgenwerth suggests the scholars were experimenting with those creatures directly. The empty phantasm shell is what you coat your weapon with to add arcane damage. The fact that this item is found at Byrgenwerth connects the school directly to the manipulation of Great One adjacent life forms. Chalice Dungeon lore frequently references Byrgenwerth as a source of early arcane research. The school had a reach far beneath the city that most players never fully appreciate when walking through its surface-level remains. The fountain at the entrance to Byrgenwerth is dry. Every decorative fountain you encounter in Yharnam and its surroundings has dried up. Whether that is connected to the blight or simply to abandonment is unclear, but the visual consistency is striking. The enemy density in Byrgenwerth is notably lower than other areas. The designers made a choice to let the environment breathe. You are encouraged to slow down and look around. Most players ignore this because they are underleveled and scared of the spiders. The lecture hall found in Byrgenwerth connects thematically to the lecture building accessed via the Hunter's Dream. That building exists in a different layer of reality, but shares architectural DNA with Byrgenwerth. The suggestion is that the lecture building is a kind of echo or memory of Byrgenwerth preserved in the dream space. Byrgenwerth's lecture hall contains a chalkboard that still has writing on it. The writing is not legible in-game, but the board is positioned where a teacher would stand in front of students. That orientation, teacher facing students with the lake and moon behind them, is telling. The placement of Willem's chair relative to the main building means his back is to the school. He has turned away from it. He is watching the lake. Whatever happened inside those walls, he is no longer interested in it. He is waiting for something. The small dock near the lake's edge has a boat that is no longer seaworthy. It is rotted and partially submerged. Someone used it at some point. Getting to Moonside Lake by boat was once an option, and the absence of that option now says something about how access to the lake was deliberately shut down. Moonside Lake glows. The light comes from below the surface. The game never explicitly explains what is generating that light, but the presence of Rom, a great one, underneath the water is the obvious implication. A god is luminous even when sleeping. The fog that fills the Moonside Lake arena is present before you engage Rom. You walk into it. You are choosing to enter. The game is giving you a moment to stop, and most players just run forward. That moment is Byrgenwerth's final lesson. Pause. Look. Think. The scholars forgot how. Rom is called the vacuous spider. Vacuous means empty, devoid of content. Rom is a great one who knows things but shares nothing. Rom's function in the world is to maintain the veil, to keep humans from seeing what is really happening with Murgo and Yarnam. Rom is a censor. The connection between Rom and Byrgenwerth runs deep. Rom was almost certainly a student or creature associated with the school before transformation. The location of the fight directly beneath Byrgenwerth's overlook is not coincidental. After you kill Rom, things change in the world. The blood moon rises. Enemies become stronger. Certain NPCs die or transform. Killing Rom removes the veil. Everything Willem was trying to prevent or enable, depending on your reading, begins to unfold. Willem's eye rune, his core belief, is present in every piece of Byrgenwerth lore. Eyes everywhere. On the environment. On the creatures. On the runes. On the boss. Bloodborne hides this in plain sight and dares you to count. The item description for the Augur of Ebrietas references Byrgenwerth and the discovery of the cosmos in a closed space. That description suggests the scholars did not just study the stars. They found something inside physical matter, inside the body, inside the ground, that connected to the cosmos directly. Ebrietas herself is connected to Byrgenwerth through the choir and through the Healing Church's later appropriation of the school's research. But Ebrietas was found in a place the scholars excavated. Byrgenwerth brought her up, or let her come. The word ebrietas in Latin relates to intoxication or drunkenness. A great one named after being drunk is interesting. The scholars who found her were intoxicated by what she represented, and like all intoxication, it destroyed them. The choir, the upper echelon of the Healing Church, used Byrgenwerth's research to attempt communion with Ebrietas. The 1/3 umbilical cord found in the game's lore connects back to that attempt. Byrgenwerth's intellectual legacy was used by people with even less restraint than its founders. The decay of Byrgenwerth is different from the decay elsewhere in the game. Most of Yarnam shows violent destruction. Byrgenwerth shows quiet abandonment. Those two kinds of endings, violent and quiet, are being contrasted deliberately by the level design team. Cainhurst's fall was violent. The plague tore through it with blood and fury. Byrgenwerth's fall was a slow dissolve. The scholars left or transformed. The building sat. The lake waited. Only Willem stayed, and he stopped speaking. The last note of Byrgenwerth as a place is that nothing inside it was ever resolved. The Healing Church took the research. The students scattered or became monsters. Willem stares at the lake. And beneath the water, a great one sleeps, maintaining the veil until you come along and end it. Chapter 2. Master Willem and the Philosophy of Eyes. Willem was right, and he was catastrophically wrong at the same time, And that tension is what makes him one of the most compelling figures in the game's lore, even though he barely appears. The eye rune philosophy is Willem's core idea: the more eyes you have, the more you can perceive. This is not presented as metaphor. Bloodborne means it literally. Eyes on the inside of your skull. Perception as a physical transformation. The item Cainhurst summons connects Logarius to Byrgenwerth by way of shared opposition to the Old Blood. This detail is often overlooked. Logarius was a Byrgenwerth scholar before he became a paladin of the Executioners. Willem's teachings produced Logarius. Logarius's transformation from scholar to zealot mirrors the broader trajectory of everyone who passed through Byrgenwerth. Knowledge radicalized them. Willem wanted understanding. What he produced was obsession. The Logarius lore is particularly interesting because he ended up sealing himself inside Cainhurst Castle to contain the Queen, a scholar who became a living lock. His final act was to use his own body as a prison. That is a very specific kind of ending for a man who started with the ambition to become godlike. Willem and Gehrman have a parallel structure. Both are ancient figures who set enormous events in motion. Both end their stories physically immobilized. Both are in some sense waiting. And both are connected to women who ascended beyond humanity. Willem to Yharnam, the Thumerian queen's blood, and Gehrman to the doll and the dream. The pebble item in Bloodborne has an unusual description. It mentions that even a pebble can be a noble weapon when faced with a great foe, and then connects this to nothing specific. But the placement of pebbles in Byrgenwerth near Willem suggests a reading where Willem himself is the pebble, a small obstacle placed against something enormous. Willem's wheelchair is pushed against the railing so that he physically cannot roll backward. He has positioned himself at the absolute edge. Whether he did this himself or someone placed him there is not answered. The fishing hamlet, encountered much later in the Old Hunters DLC, provides a retroactive context for Willem. The villagers there were subjected to experiments involving eyes, specifically having eyes placed inside their skulls by the fishing hamlet hunters and their interactions with Kos. Willem's philosophy did not emerge in a vacuum. There was precedent. Kos, or some say Cosm, is the dead great one on the fishing hamlet's shore. The parasites from her body, the Kos parasites, are connected to the eyes on the inside concept directly. The villagers who absorbed these parasites developed the kind of inner sight Willem spent his career chasing. Whether Willem knew about Kos is not confirmed, but the timing of his epiphany, his pivot from blood to eyes, corresponds loosely with what we know of the expeditions to the fishing hamlet. The implication is suggestive. The gesture Willem makes when you approach him, rolling a pebble between his fingers and then tossing it forward, is widely interpreted as a teaching gesture. Roll something forward. Keep moving. It is gentle and strange. From a man in a catatonic state, it is surprisingly communicative. The pebble toss has also been read as Willem, indicating that you should jump off the ledge. Given the location and the gesture's direction, that reading is not unreasonable. He may be pointing you toward the lake, toward Rom. That ambiguity is Bloodborne's character. Willem's single gesture can be read as encouragement, as instruction, or as a weary pointing toward the next disaster. All three are consistent with his arc. The three-finger gesture he makes in the original game version before a later patch was slightly different. Community members who recorded and compared versions noted a subtle change in the animation. Why From Software altered it is unclear, but the change removed a detail that some had interpreted as Willem indicating 3, as in 3/3 of the umbilical cord. The 3 chords of the umbilical cord that you need to collect for the true ending of the game are connected to Byrgenwerth's legacy. The cord found in the abandoned old workshop links directly to the healing church, which grew from Byrgenwerth. The cord from Murgo's wet nurse connects to the nightmare that Byrgenwerth's research helped enable. The chain is long. Willem believed the Great Ones were benevolent, or at minimum incomprehensible, rather than malevolent. This distinguishes him from the Healing Church's later followers, who tried to use Great One contact for institutional power. Willem wanted contact for contact's sake. The tragedy of Willem is that his most gifted students, Lawrence and Willem's other disciples, could not hold on to that purity of intent. They took his tools and made an institution out of them. The Healing Church commodified Willem's transcendence quest. Lawrence appears in the main game only as a skull and as a horrifying boss in the Dilkey. His skull sits in the Grand Cathedral. His boss form is a visceral monster. The distance between those two presentations, revered relic and screaming beast, encapsulates everything Byrgenwerth warned about and failed to prevent. The skull of Lawrence is described as having something to do with the old blood contract. Lawrence made a deal. He took Byrgenwerth's research and traded its purity for institutional survival, for the Healing Church, for the ability to spread the knowledge to more people. He thought scale would solve the problem. It didn't. Willem's response to Lawrence's plan is implied in the estrangement between them. They separated. Byrgenwerth closed. Willem sat down at the edge of the cliff and did not get up again. That is a very complete emotional story told entirely without cutscenes. The choir experiments on the upper floors of the Grand Cathedral directly mirror Byrgenwerth's experiments, but with more power and less wisdom. Byrgenwerth at least had restraint. The choir went further, faster, with worse results. The one reborn boss is a consequence of choir experimentation. That creature, a mass of corpses and screeching bells, is what happens when you keep trying to contact Great Ones without understanding what contact actually means. Byrgenwerth studied the idea. The choir tried to industrialize it. Willem's last name, if it is a last name, appears in no item description. He is only ever Master Willem. That honorific without a surname suggests either tremendous prestige or a deliberate erasure of his personal history. Possibly both. The term master rather than professor or doctor in a school context suggests Willem's authority was more like a guild master than an academic. He was not just teaching knowledge, he was training practitioners. Several item descriptions use the phrase inhuman wisdom. Willem's approach to wisdom was to make humans capable of receiving it by transforming them. The inhuman wisdom was the goal, and the inhumanness was the cost. The Bloodborne community has spent years arguing over whether Willem is sympathetic. The answer suggested by the text is that he is sympathetic, and that his choices led to catastrophe. Those two things are both true. The game does not choose between them. The note that Rom is under the lake Willem oversees is the most direct connection between Willem's philosophy and its consequences. He wanted eyes. He got Rom. He got a Great One, so saturated with eyes that she is the embodiment of his philosophy, and she is sealed away from him, doing a job that prevents human insight rather than enabling it. That irony, that the endpoint of Willem's eye philosophy is an eyeball creature actively blocking human insight, is either a cosmic joke or a profound narrative choice. Given from Software's track record, it is the latter. The giant eye mobs in the Nightmare of Mensis are another endpoint of the eye philosophy. Eyes without bodies. Perception stripped of humanity entirely. Those creatures kill you with insight, with too much understanding. Willem's dream made literal and lethal. Mensis, the School of Mensis, was another institution that branched from Byrgenwerth's tradition. If the Healing Church was Byrgenwerth's conservative, institutional child, Mensis was its reckless, fanatical one. They went directly for communion, using a ceremony to contact Mergo, and paid the price. The brain of Mensis is what the Mensis scholars found at the end of their ceremony, or what they became, a giant brain suspended in the nightmare, radiating madness. Mikolash calls it a friend. Mikolash is not well. Mikolash's dialogue about cages references wisdom directly. Grant us eyes, he says. He is still pursuing Willem's original goal, degraded through Mensis's recklessness into something broken and circular. He runs from you, asking for eyes while trapped in a cage. The image is complete. Willem never screamed for eyes. He was quiet. He read, and he thought, and he sat by a lake. That quietness, compared to Mikolash's frantic begging, shows the distance travelled between original intent and final destination. The runes found in Byrgenwerth and its surroundings are described as being the language of the Great Ones. Willem collected them. He was not just seeking eyes as organ. He was seeking language. Understanding. The eyes were the mechanism for reading a text that human brains could not parse. The rune communion increases the number of blood vials you can carry. Carol, the rune transcriber, learned to hear the Great One's voices and inscribe them. The communion rune suggests the Great Ones communicate in ways related to blood and exchange. Willem's eye philosophy and the blood philosophy he rejected are more intertwined than he acknowledged. At the end of Willem's life, at the end of his arc, he is not triumphant and he is not destroyed. He is suspended. Watching, waiting for something that may already have passed or may never arrive. That is arguably the most human ending in a game about people trying to stop being human. Willem's last act in the narrative might be the pebble toss, teaching a new hunter, a stranger, without words, pointing toward the lake, toward Rom, toward the truth he spent his whole life trying to reach, and which he can only now gesture toward. The railing at the edge of the cliff shows signs of repair. Someone reinforced it at some point. Whether to protect Willem or to keep something else from coming up from the lake is an open question that the texture work raises without answering. The clouds above Moonside Lake have a different texture than the clouds elsewhere in the game. They are lower and more dispersed, as though the presence below the water is generating its own atmospheric effect. Environmental storytelling through sky texture is the kind of detail that makes Bloodborne's world feel genuinely alive. And Willem is part of that living world. Not a statue, not a legend, a man who sat at the edge of what he created and could not look away, even when he could no longer see. Chapter 3. The Students Who Did Not Leave. The Spider Scholars of Byrgenwerth are not random monster placements. Each of them was a person. Each of them made a choice to pursue the school's research past a point of no return, or had that choice made for them. The scholar transformation in Bloodborne is described as a consequence of insight accumulation beyond human tolerance. Too many eyes on the inside of the skull literally begin to manifest on the outside. The transformation is the body trying to accommodate what the mind demanded. The webbing that connects the transformed scholars to their environment is not spider silk in the traditional sense. The in-game bestiary and community analysis of texture work suggests it is closer to vitreous material, the same gel that fills an eyeball. These creatures are secreting eye matter. The first spider scholar you encounter in Byrgenwerth is positioned near the entrance. It is smaller than the others and moves more erratically. This is likely intentional, a newer transformation, still adjusting, contrasted with the more settled creatures deeper inside. The larger spider scholars in the upper sections of the building move with a kind of settled patience. They know this space. They have been here a long time. Their movements have the quality of someone who is still, in some degraded way, conducting research. Several of the scholars are positioned near windows, facing outward, watching. The posture mirrors Willem's own outward-facing stillness, and the mirroring is probably not accidental. One scholar in a second-floor room is positioned facing a wall. Not a window. Not a door. A wall. That anomalous placement stands out, and the most compelling reading is that it is looking at something on or through the wall that no longer exists. A window that was bricked up. a door that was sealed. The scholar that guards the door to the back area of Byrgenwerth is larger than the others and seems to react differently to sound. Community testing has shown it has a broader detection radius than standard scholars, suggesting it was placed as a deliberate guardian rather than a random encounter. The lore of the Forbidden Woods feeds into the scholar story. The giants in the woods and the various creatures there are partly the result of Byrgenwerth's experiments conducted at a distance from the main campus. The school used the woods as an outdoor laboratory. The snake creatures in the Forbidden Woods, humans with snake heads emerging from their necks, are an older and different kind of transformation than the scholar spiders. They suggest Byrgenwerth was experimenting with multiple approaches to transcendence simultaneously. The presence of snakes as transformation result is interesting in the context of Willem's eye philosophy. Snakes are associated with vision and wisdom in numerous mythologies. The scholars who transform this way may have been pursuing an older branch of the same research. Alfred, encountered as an NPC in the Cathedral Ward, was a student of Logarius, who was himself a Byrgenwerth scholar. Alfred's crusade against Cainhurst and the Vileblood is a third-generation consequence of Willem's original school. The intellectual lineage runs unbroken from the campus to Alfred's fanaticism. The burial blade, Gehrman's weapon, has connections to Byrgenwerth through its arcane properties. Gehrman attended Byrgenwerth, or had deep contact with its scholars before becoming the first hunter. The old school's knowledge shaped the first workshop's tools. Simon the Harrowed, found in the DL key, has dialogue that references Byrgenwerth's connection to the fishing hamlet and the original source of eye-based insight. Simon is one of the clearer links between the school's philosophy and the older, stranger history that predates it. The transformed scholar enemies have two primary attacks. One is a projectile of web or vitreous material. One is a close-range swipe. The projectile attack is interesting because it suggests these creatures still have some higher executive function. They are choosing to attack at range when possible. The sound design for the scholar enemies includes a clicking that some community members have identified as similar to rapid eye movement. The sound design team at From Software worked with the lore team closely on Bloodborne, and that kind of cross-department detail is consistent with the game's production culture. Items dropped by scholar enemies occasionally include quicksilver bullets. That is a strange drop. Scholars were not hunters. The presence of bullets suggests either that some former hunters became scholars, or that the bullets were present in the school before the transformations and the creatures. Carry them residually. One of the scholars can be found apparently asleep in a chair if you approach from a specific angle before triggering it. The chair position and the appearance of dormancy before activation is one of those small animations that rewards careful observation. The lore connection between the scholars and the Pthumerian research that predates Byrgenwerth is suggested by certain Chalice dungeon enemies that show similar early stage. Transformations. The eye accumulation process was not invented by Willem. He may have discovered records of it from the Pthumerians and developed a theory around existing evidence. The Pthumerians built the Chalice dungeons as a way to access Great One artifacts. Their research into the Great Ones predates the Healing Church and Byrgenwerth by a significant margin. Willem may have been recovering lost knowledge rather than discovering new knowledge. That reframing of Willem, not as an original visionary, but as a very good archaeologist of ancient wisdom, changes the emotional colour of Byrgenwerth slightly. The school was not a beginning, it was a revival, and revivals often misread what they are reviving. The empty lecture hall in Byrgenwerth still has student desks facing the front. How many students attended Byrgenwerth at its peak is never stated, but the number of desks and the size of the hall suggest it was a substantial institution, not a small personal school. The personal nature of Willem's later work, Alone at the Cliff's Edge, contrasted with the institutional scale of the lecture hall, suggests the school changed over time. It started as a lecture hall and ended as a private obsession. The students were incidental to the final chapter. Gascoigne, the first major boss most players encounter, has no direct connection to Byrgenwerth that is confirmed. But his family's story, the daughter waiting at home, the wife killed, the music box, mirrors the emotional cost of the broader scholarly pursuit. People who got adjacent to Byrgenwerth's knowledge paid personal prices in very human ways. Several community members have noted that the moon present in the Byrgenwerth area has a slightly different hue than elsewhere in the game. Not much. A few percentage points of colour. But it is different, and the consistency of the colour change, always present in that zone, suggests it is intentional. The lake itself is the visual anchor of the whole area. It is beautiful. Moonside Lake is genuinely beautiful in Bloodborne's aesthetic, which is unusual. Most of the game's beauty is grotesque beauty. The lake is just beautiful. That unguarded aesthetic choice might be intentional, might be making you comfortable before the ROM fight. The birds that sometimes fly across the Moonside Lake area do not appear to be the same species as birds seen elsewhere. Several players have noted their silhouettes are wrong. Too large. Too slow. Whether this is a design shortcut or an intentional detail is debated. Fishing hamlet parallels continue in the Scholar area. The hamlet's fishermen transformed due to contact with Kos, and Kos parasite exposure. The Scholars transformed due to eye accumulation. Both transformations preserved some intelligence. Both resulted in hostile, pitiful creatures. The parallel structure suggests Bloodborne is exploring a theme. The cost of insight is always paid in humanity. The final Scholar before the Moonside Lake access point is positioned so that defeating it opens your path to the fog gate leading to Rom. That placement means the last human thing you do before facing a Great One is kill what was once a Scholar. The sequence feels deliberate. Standing at the Moonside Lake fog gate and looking back at Byrgenwerth, the building's windows are lit from inside. Something is still moving in there. Or the lights have just never gone out. Either way, Byrgenwerth refuses to be fully abandoned even as you are walking away from it. Chapter 4. Runes, Language, and the Grammar of the Cosmos. Carol was a student of Byrgenwerth. The Carol runes that form Bloodborne's upgrade and modification system are her work, and tracing them back to the school changes how the whole rune system feels. The description for Carol runes states that she was one of Byrgenwerth's more humble students, who had the ability to hear the voices of the Great Ones and transcribe them. Humble in the context of a school full of people reaching for divinity is a pointed word. Carol could hear the Great Ones, not see them, not commune with them, hear them. That sensory specificity is important. Willem's system was about vision. Carol worked with sound. The school apparently housed multiple approaches to Great One contact. The runes themselves are described as being like a foreign language. Not symbols, language. There is a grammar to the cosmos, and Carol was transcribing it. What she transcribed became the most practical and widespread artifact of Byrgenwerth's research. The clawmark rune is described as representing the hunger of the beasts. It enhances visceral attacks. That a rune derived from Great One language should encode beastly hunger suggests the Great One's vocabulary includes concepts humans associate with their worst impulses. The Blood Rapture rune restores health on visceral attacks. Its description mentions that it was a secret practice of the choir. Again, the choir, the highest level of the healing church, using Byrgenwerth-derived runes. The chain of institutional transmission runs from Carol's humble transcription to the church's most powerful rituals. The Fading Lake rune increases bolt damage. Its visual design echoes the Moonside Lake, and its name directly references it. This is a rune that is geographically anchored. It contains the specific location where Byrgenwerth's great experiment was conducted. The Corruption rune is associated with Cainhurst and vileness. That a rune in Carroll's system should encode corruption and be associated with Cainhurst suggests the rune language was not purely Byrgenwerth's possession. It was being developed and modified in multiple places simultaneously. The rune air is found in the Nightmare Frontier and is connected to the Old Blood and the Great One's inheritance. Its description mentions the terrible aeons of the past and connects rune practice to the oldest lineages of both blood and cosmic contact. Carroll was translating something ancient. The Mother rune is one of the most powerful and unusual reducing echoes lost on death. That a rune about motherhood should reduce death penalty is connected to Bloodborne's deeper themes about the relationship between Great Ones and the children they seek and lose. Byrgenwerth's research eventually touched even the concept of Great One parenthood. The kin cold-blood item, which provides echoes when consumed, is described as deriving from those who have become kin, the creatures adjacent to Great Ones. Carroll's language system categorizes enemies and beings. It is not just magic, it is taxonomy. The taxonomy of kin versus beast is Byrgenwerth's intellectual contribution to Yharnam in a very practical way. Before Willem and Carroll, there was presumably just blood and monsters. Byrgenwerth gave the Church a framework for understanding what they were dealing with. That framework, as all frameworks do, shaped what they could see. The lake rune, found in multiple Chalice dungeon locations, references the lake at Byrgenwerth and the wisdom sleeping beneath it. Wisdom sleeping, not wisdom waiting. Sleeping. The rune acknowledges that Rom is dormant, that what is under the water is not active but is present, and that the presence is associated with knowledge. The Rune Workshop tool is an item that allows you to equip runes. Its description says it was a common tool of Byrgenwerth Workshop students. The word common is surprising. It implies rune use was not exotic or elite within the school. Everyone learned to use them. If rune use was common within Byrgenwerth, the transformation of students into scholars and the continued presence of rune-capable tools in the school suggests that even after. The scholars transformed, the tools remained. The technology outlasted the humanity of its creators. The Hunter rune is associated with the Hunter's Oath and the original compact between hunters and the dream. Its description notes that hunters who dream carry the mark of the moon. Byrgenwerth's rune system intersects with the Hunter's dream in this way, connecting the school to Gehrman's pact and the moon presence. That connection between Carroll's rune language and the moon presence's covenant with hunters is one of the stronger suggestions that the moon presence was aware of Byrgenwerth and may have been influencing events there from an early stage. The moon presence is never named in most of the game. It is the entity that Gehrman serves, the thing that appears if you choose to wake up from the dream. Its relationship to the moon that Byrgenwerth scholars studied is one of the most actively discussed gaps in the lore. Several Chalice dungeon runes are not available in the main game. Their descriptions contain information about Thumerian practices that Byrgenwerth may have been drawing on. The rune language predates Carroll. She was not inventing it. She was recovering and transcribing something much older. The communion rune specifically increases the number of blood vials you can hold, connecting blood and rune practice in a way that contradicts Willem's pivot from blood to eyes. The rune language is not purely about the eye philosophy. It contains blood. Willem rejected blood, but the language he built his practice on did not. The guidance rune mentions something about an ancient medium and the wisdom of the Great Ones guiding hunters from an unseen place. Guidance from unseen places is the quiet promise underlying all of Byrgenwerth's research. The school was reaching for something it could not see, hoping to be guided toward it. The Deep Sea rune increases frenzy resistance. Frenzy, in Bloodborne, is what happens when you are exposed to too much insight too quickly. Your mind breaks. A rune that resists frenzy being described with imagery of deep dark water directly echoes Moonside Lake, where too much insight also waits. The striking shape of many Carol runes echoes the eye motif in their visual design. Even runes that are not explicitly about vision contain circular or ocular elements in their inscriptions. Carol's system, consciously or not, kept returning to the master's obsession. The Radiance rune is associated with the choir and enhances regaining health from visceral attacks. Radiance suggests light. The Great Ones and their associated kin creatures emit light. Byrgenwerth, through Carol's language, encoded the properties of light emitting divine beings into a practical tool used by blood-soaked hunters. That abstraction is impressive and horrifying. Several rune names are in languages other than English in the original Japanese game text. The localization team made specific choices about how to render these names, and some of the translated names lose nuance that the original Japanese preserved. The word translated as guidance in English has connotations in Japanese of divine oracle rather than simple direction. The rune system as a whole represents what Byrgenwerth actually accomplished. Not transcendence, not contact, not apotheosis, but a practical grammar derived from divine language that surviving humans could use to incrementally improve their odds of survival against the consequences of Byrgenwerth's failures. That is a quietly devastating legacy. A school that wanted to become gods left behind a set of power-ups for hunters fighting monsters. The distance between aspiration and outcome, in rune form, is the whole story. Chapter 5. The Lake, the Veil, and what Rom protects. Moonside Lake is accessed through a fog gate at the back of Byrgenwerth. The moment you walk through it, you are in a different register of reality. The lake is impossibly calm. The sky is different. The sound is wrong. Rom the vacuous spider sits at the centre of the lake. She is enormous. She does not attack immediately. She sits with her back to you for a moment before the fight begins. That moment, where you can see her clearly and she is not engaged, is one of the most visually striking in the game. The small spiders that accompany Rom are often described as her children, but the lore does not confirm a reproductive relationship. They are more likely extensions of herself, fragments of the same consciousness that maintain the veil from the outside, while Rom maintains it from the centre. The veil Rom maintains is what prevents humans from perceiving the true state of Yharnam. Under the veil, the average citizen sees a blighted city with a blood plague. Above the veil, what you see after killing Rom is the blood moon, the ritual, Murgo's procession, the true horror. Rom was a mercy. That reading of Rom as mercy rather than obstacle is one of the more humane interpretations of Bloodborne's bosses. She is not malevolent. She is performing a function. She is managing the information flow between humanity and the cosmos, and she is doing it gently. Killing Rom is not a morally clean action. The game does not celebrate it. You walk through the fog, you fight through the spiders, you break her veil, and then things get dramatically worse. The reward for defeating Rom is catastrophe. The blood moon that rises after Rom's death is not caused by her death. The ritual was already ongoing. Murgo's procession was already happening. Rom was filtering it. Without her filter, you see what was always there. The question of who placed Rom in the lake is never explicitly answered. Willem is the obvious suspect, given the location. The school of Mensis is also implicated, given their proximity to the nightmare and the cosmic rituals that Rom's veil may have been containing. The Chalice dungeons contain records of Rom's type, Great Ones who descended and took root in physical locations. The precedent for a Great One living under a body of water is not unique to Moonside Lake. The Thumerians documented similar phenomena. Rom's designation as vacuous is the detail that most repays analysis. In philosophy, vacuous typically means devoid of content or lacking substance. A vacuous statement is true but uninformative. Rom the vacuous spider knows everything. She knows the truth of the world. She says nothing. Her knowledge is present and inaccessible. She is, in philosophical terms, a vacuous truth. The connection to the cosmic mother archetype in Bloodborne's broader Great One taxonomy puts Rom in an interesting position. She is connected to Kos through the broader theme of water-bound Great Ones. Both are associated with bodies of water. Both are connected to the concept of sheltering or protecting something. Kos sheltered her larvae, the Kos parasites, which then gave insight to the fishermen of the fishing hamlet. Rom shelters the veil, which protects humanity from insight it cannot handle. Both are mothers in a functional sense, even if not a biological one. The fight mechanics of the Rom encounter reinforce the law. She teleports away from you repeatedly. You keep having to find her again. The fight is about persistence in the face of something that keeps moving away from you. The veil keeps reasserting itself. You have to keep pursuing. The small spiders that spawn and attack during the Rom fight can kill you much more effectively than Rom herself if you ignore them. The game is telling you that the consequences of what you are doing are more dangerous than the act itself. The aftermath of killing Rom is what matters. The lake's water is shallow enough to walk across. You never sink. The water reaches approximately ankle height across the entire arena. The visual implication of being able to walk on water in front of a Great One is not accidental. After Rom dies, she makes a sound that several players have described as mournful rather than pained. The sound design team's intention here is not confirmed, but the description is consistent across multiple independent accounts. She does not scream in pain. She makes a sound like ending. The item that falls after Rom's death is not a boss soul in the traditional From Software sense. Rom leaves behind echoes, as all bosses do, but the specific way the game acknowledges her death through its environmental changes is itself the reward. The world's transformation is Rom's legacy. The blood moon being released by Rom's death is simultaneously her failure and her final contribution. She could not hold it forever. She was always going to fail, but she may have given humanity enough time to produce a hunter capable of doing something about what comes next. That reading of Rom as a temporal measure, buying time for the right hunter to arrive, is one of the more hopeful interpretations of her role. She was not a permanent solution. She was a pause. The location of Byrgenwerth, directly above the lake where Rom sleeps, cannot be coincidental. Willem placed himself where he could watch over the lake, whether he watched with guilt, with care, with scientific interest, or with something else is not specified. But he watched. The connection between Byrgenwerth's failed pursuit of godhood and the peaceful sleeping of a god directly beneath the school is the central irony of the area. The scholars spent their lives trying to reach the divine. The divine was always right there, under the water, asleep. Chapter 6. The Healing Church's Inheritance. The Healing Church did not emerge from nowhere. It grew directly out of Byrgenwerth's research, its personnel, and its failures. Understanding Byrgenwerth is understanding where the Church's power came from and why it was always going to go wrong. Lawrence was the key figure in the transition. He took Willem's research and created a structured institution around it. The Healing Church was his answer to the question of how to make Byrgenwerth's knowledge available without making Byrgenwerth's mistakes. He made different mistakes. The blood of healing that the Church dispensed was derived from the old blood connected to the Pthumerian, remains deep in the Chalice dungeons. Byrgenwerth had studied those remains. Lawrence used them. The Church's sacrament was Byrgenwerth's research made commercial. The Grand Cathedral is architecturally connected to Byrgenwerth through its use of circular motifs. The rose windows of the cathedral echo the circular windows of the school. The design language carries over, softened and beautified, but present. The choir, the cathedral's elite inner circle, conducted experiments with Ebrietas that directly mirror Byrgenwerth's approach. They believed in accumulating cosmic contact. They believed that more exposure meant more wisdom. They had read the same texts Willem read and drawn the same conclusions. Ebrietas, daughter of the cosmos, was left behind by the Great Ones when they departed. Byrgenwerth scholars discovered her in the ruins they excavated. She was alone. She was grieving. The church inherited her along with the ruins, and the choir tried to use her. The item descriptions around Ebrietas are some of the most complex in the game. She is described as having attended to the scholars after the Great Ones left, as though she took comfort in human company after cosmic abandonment. She may have been cooperative with the choir out of loneliness. That makes the choir's exploitation of her loneliness one of the crueler elements of the law. Ebrietas trusted humans because Byrgenwerth was kind to her, or at least interesting to her. The church's institutions then used that trust for experiments. The choir's end result was not enlightenment. Ludwig, the first church hunter, shows what happened when the church extended its reach. The holy blade, the beast, the nightmare. Byrgenwerth's inheritance ran hot through the church and burned. Ludwig's boss fight in the Dilka is one of the most emotionally complex in the game. His transformation into a beast, while still carrying the trappings of church authority, the holy moonlight blade, is the perfect image of what Byrgenwerth's legacy produced. Power that exceeds the humanity of those who carry it. The Old Hunter's Dilka as a whole is a document of Byrgenwerth's legacy playing out over generations of hunters. Every major figure there is a downstream consequence of what the school started. Simon, Ludwig, Maria, Gehrman. The list runs long. Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower is connected to the fishing hamlet, which is connected to Kos, which is connected to the eye philosophy, which leads back to Byrgenwerth. Her guilt over what was done to the villagers is the human face of an institutional crime that began with a scholar's epiphany about eyes. The Astral Clock Tower itself, with its mechanical precision and its horrifying residence, is what happens when Byrgenwerth's intellectual tradition is pushed into a medical context. The scholars wanted to understand transformation. The church turned that understanding into a medical procedure. The clock tower is the surgical theatre. The eye implements found in the clock tower are medical tools, instruments for inserting eyes, for doing to patients what the scholars did to themselves. The industrialization of the eye philosophy into a medical program is Byrgenwerth's intellectual contribution made mechanical, and it is terrible. The patients in the clock tower who have become hostile are not unlike the scholars who transformed in Byrgenwerth. Both groups were pursuing insight through physical transformation. Both groups lost what made them human in the process. Both sets of ruins still contain the tools that were used on them. Byrgenwerth's legacy through the church is ultimately a story about good research and bad institutions. The research was real, the knowledge was real, the great ones are real, but each institution that inherited the research added more ambition, more scale, more haste, and less wisdom, until the chain of inheritance produced catastrophe at industrial scale. Chapter 7. Hidden in Plain Sight. The minor environmental details of Byrgenwerth are where the area's character lives. The major lore is important, but the small stuff is what makes the place feel real. The boot prints near the entrance to Byrgenwerth suggest multiple visitors recently, or recently by the standards of the area's abandonment. The prints are dried but clear. Someone was here after the scholars transformed. The handprints on a wall near the back staircase are at an unusual height, not adult height. The community has noted this, and most readings settle on either a small adult scholar or something post-transformation moving on the wall. Both are unsettling in different ways. A cracked mirror in a side room of Byrgenwerth reflects the room behind you, but not quite correctly. The reflection is slightly delayed. Whether this is a lighting engine artifact or deliberate is one of those details that Bloodborne never clarifies, which is the point. The bookshelf in the main study has one shelf that is empty while all others are full. That empty shelf is at reaching height. Someone took those books. Recently. Or relatively recently. The absence of those specific books, while all others remain, implies selection. Someone knew what they wanted. The soil near the fountain entrance is disturbed, churned, like something came up through it, or dug down into it. The disturbance is not marked or explained. It is just there, and the size and shape of it suggests something larger than a human. Certain wall stones in the back corridor have scratch marks at consistent intervals. Pattern scratches, not damage. Someone was counting, or marking time, or leaving a message in a system no longer readable. The kitchen area of Byrgenwerth, a room that is easy to miss, has a pot that is still on a cold hearth. The pot contains residue. Community analysis of the visual suggests it was a preparation of something arcane rather than food. The kitchen was repurposed. A painting in the upper study depicts a body of water. It is not identified in the item description or the environment as Moonside Lake, but the composition and the light in the painted sky are consistent with the lake's aesthetic. Someone was painting what they saw from the window. The painting is unfinished. The bottom left corner has no detail. The brushwork stops mid-scene. Whoever was painting it stopped working and did not return. The small shrine in a corner of the lowest accessible area of Byrgenwerth has offerings at its base. Dried flowers. A doll figure. Small personal objects. Someone was maintaining this shrine after the scholarly collapse of the institution. It was not Willem. The offerings are too personal for academic ritual. That shrine, tended by someone whose identity is unknown, is one of the most quietly human things in all of Byrgenwerth. Amid the scholarship and the transformation and the cosmic horror, someone kept bringing flowers. The locked room in Byrgenwerth that cannot be accessed in normal gameplay has been data mined by community members. The room contains only a chair facing a window. Nothing else. A chair facing a window in a locked room. The contents are too minimal to be accidental and too minimal to explain. The rope ladder added to one section of the school suggests a retrofit. The building was not originally designed to access that area by ladder. Someone added that access point after the building's primary construction for a purpose that was not part of the original plans. The star charts on the walls of the observatory, adjacent to Byrgenwerth, accessible from the school's exterior, show constellations that do not match any known real-world star. Maps. The game's community has compared them extensively to historical European and Arabic astronomy, and found no matches. They are either fictional or encoded. The star charts also show a consistent marker, a highlighted point, in a position that corresponds loosely with where the moon presence might appear, given Bloodborne's cosmology. Whether this is intentional design or a coincidence of aesthetic choice is unresolved. The telescope in that same observatory is pointed at the lake rather than the sky. Someone reoriented it. Whatever they were trying to observe, it was not the stars. It was what lay beneath the water, viewed from above. The footpath from Byrgenwerth's main building to the lake's edge is worn. Not a designated path, not paving, just worn grass and packed earth from repeated walking. Scholars went back and forth from the building to the lake frequently. The lake was not peripheral, it was central to daily life there. The small alcove near the cliff's edge, separate from Willem's chair position, contains a small collection of stones. They are arranged, not randomly placed. The arrangement is not a recognizable pattern, but it is clearly deliberate. Someone arranged those stones and left them. The plant life around Moonside Lake is different from the rest of the Byrgenwerth area. Larger leaves. Deeper colour, plants that should not be that large given the apparent climate. The proximity to whatever is in the lake is having an effect on local flora. The moon's reflection in Moonside Lake is wrong. The reflection is too large. The moon in the sky is full, but the reflection shows something wider than a full moon. The water is showing a different sky than the one above it. This detail is subtle enough that most players miss it entirely. The transition between the Forbidden Woods and the Byrgenwerth approach changes the ambient sound. Birdsong stops. Wind stops. There is a near silence that is different from quiet. It is the absence of living sound. The birds in the Forbidden Woods do not follow you into Byrgenwerth's area. The specific silence of Byrgenwerth is its most disturbing quality and its most deliberate design choice. From Software's audio team created a sound profile for the area that strips out the ambient life while keeping architectural echo. The building sounds occupied. The world sounds empty. After completing Byrgenwerth for the first time, several community members report that returning to the area produces a subtle change in how the scholar enemies respond. They are slower to aggress. Whether this is a game state change, a player psychology effect, or something in the enemy AI scripting is not confirmed. But the reports are consistent enough to be interesting. The final detail of Byrgenwerth's environment is also its most structural. The layout of the building forces you to pass through its history in sequence. The entrance, the study spaces, the lecture hall, the back access to the lake. You move through Byrgenwerth in the same order the scholars did. From arrival to inquiry to the thing in the water, the building teaches you its own story through the act of walking through it. Chapter 8. The Nightmare Echoes. The Nightmare Lecture Building is the most direct supernatural echo of Byrgenwerth in the game. It exists in a dream layer, accessed from the Hunter's Dream, and its architecture is unmistakably Byrgenwerth adjacent. The lecture building students, encountered as enemies there, are in various stages of transformation. Unlike Byrgenwerth's mostly complete transformations, the lecture building contains people mid-process. The nightmare has arrested their change and holds them suspended. The lecture building contains notes and papers that are readable fragments, unlike the unreadable books of the main campus. These fragments expand the Byrgenwerth lore in specific ways. They reference Wilhelm's lectures. They reference the two schools, Byrgenwerth and Mensis, and they reference the moment of the split. The split between Byrgenwerth and Mensis is described in these notes as a disagreement about methodology. Byrgenwerth believed in patient observation and accumulation of insight. Mensis wanted direct communion, wanted to call a great one directly. The split was about haste. The student who wrote the most coherent notes in the lecture building expresses admiration for both approaches and terror at the result of Mensis's choice. That student, voice preserved in Nightmare paper, is one of the clearest human perspectives on the institutions that destroyed Yharnam. The rope ladder in the lecture building that goes nowhere, from one floor to another floor, that has no landing, just opens into void, is an architectural nightmare element that echoes the broken ladder logic of the dream. It is also a precise image of Byrgenwerth's intellectual project. Build the ladder, never reach the top. Mikolash, the Mensis boss encountered in the Nightmare of Mensis, attended the lecture building. His dialogue contains fragments of Byrgenwerth philosophy filtered through Mensis's radicalization. He is a student who took the wrong lesson from every teacher. The cage on Mikolash's head is often interpreted as Mensis's attempt to contain their own minds during the ceremony that created the nightmare. The cages were worn to create a small enclosed space in which the Great Ones could not enter. The paradox is that Mikolash now runs through a nightmare wearing his cage voluntarily. The Nightmare Frontier, another dream layer area, contains enemies that are further transformed versions of what Byrgenwerth's scholars were attempting to become. The amygdala that dominates that area is the kind of Great One that waited at the end of the path the scholars were walking. It is not a comfortable destination. The amygdala's hand, reaching out of doorways and cliffs throughout the main game in a way only certain hunters can see, is the eye philosophy made visible. Only those with sufficient insight can see the amygdala. The scholars wanted to see more. The amygdala is what more seeing looks like. The entire insight mechanic of the game, where accumulating madness inducing knowledge changes what you perceive in the world, is an interactive implementation of Willem's philosophy. The game makes the player experience the thing the scholars were seeking. More insight, more world, more horror. At maximum insight, the game changes. Enemies behave differently. You hear sounds that are not there at lower insight. The music shifts. The game is different. This is the most ambitious implementation of a lore concept in any From Software game. The metaphysics are the mechanics. Byrgenwerth built the theoretical framework for this. The game built the interactive version. Playing Bloodborne with and without high insight is experiencing Willem's philosophy directly. And the thing you experience at high insight is not transcendence, it is exposure. The difference was always going to be important, and no one warned you. The final echo of Byrgenwerth in the nightmare is the moon presence itself, the entity that Gehrman serves, the thing that created the hunter's dream. Its relationship to Willem and his school is never made explicit. But the timing, the moon presence becoming involved with hunters around the period of Byrgenwerth's collapse, suggests a causal connection. The moon presence may have come to Yharnam because of what Byrgenwerth was doing, or it may have been there already, and Byrgenwerth was doing what it was doing because of the moon presence's influence. That question of whether the scholars were discovering or being led is Bloodborne's most unresolved mystery, and it is unresolved because the answer would resolve the mystery. That makes the whole game worth playing. Byrgenwerth does not resolve. It echoes, in the church, in the nightmare, in the hunters, in the mechanics of the game you are playing, in the runes on your character sheet, in the insight counter ticking up as you move through Yharnam. Everything that follows in Bloodborne follows from a man who once believed that having more eyes would help you see more clearly. He was right, and everything that followed from that rightness is the reason you are here. You said, "Continue for an additional 8 hours, continue for an additional 8 hours." 19 Claude responded. 4111, Crazy Bloodborne, Byrgenwerth Easter eggs. 4111, Crazy Bloodborne, Byrgenwerth Easter eggs. Chapter 9, The Blood of the Old Labyrinth. The Chalice dungeons sit beneath Yharnam like a shadow archive. Every truth that the surface world obscures, every fact that the healing church suppressed, every secret that Byrgenwerth never published, is preserved down there in stone and blood and silence. The connection between Byrgenwerth and the Chalice dungeons is not incidental. Willem's scholars were excavating beneath Yharnam. The ruins they found, the Thumerian remains, the artifacts, the Great Ones sealed underground, these were the raw material of everything the school later theorized about. The Thumerians predate Byrgenwerth by a significant margin. They built the labyrinth. They conducted the original rituals. They made the first contact with the Great Ones, and the Great Ones' attention apparently followed them into ruin. What the Thumerians started, Byrgenwerth was trying to decode. The labyrinth is described in item lore as being made by the Thumerians to worship and enshrine the Great Ones. It is not just a dungeon system, it is a cathedral complex extending beneath the entire continent. Byrgenwerth found one entrance to something vast. The Thumerian descendant boss, found deep in certain Chalice dungeons, moves with unnatural grace and wields a whip of blood. Its movements are almost beautiful. It is what a human looks like when they have been shaped by proximity to the Great Ones over generations, rather than through a single catastrophic transformation. Slow change versus fast change. The result is more elegant and no less dangerous. The Pthumerian Queen Yharnam appears at the end of specific chalice dungeon chains. She is pregnant. She bleeds. She reaches toward you with a gesture of supplication. The fight with her is one of the most deeply uncomfortable in the game because she does not seem to be an enemy. Yharnam, the Pthumerian Queen, is described as having been subjected to unthinkable experiments. Her pregnancy is not natural. Her condition is the product of Pthumerian rituals involving Great One contact, rituals that Byrgenwerth discovered records of and apparently attempted to understand or replicate. The 1/3 umbilical cord is the artifact that connects Queen Yharnam to Murgo and to the entire umbilical cord lore. Byrgenwerth scholars found records of this artifact. The Healing Church inherited those records and later acquired the artifact itself. The chain of custody for that cord is a summary of the entire game's history. The Murgo referred to in Murgo's Wet Nurse, and the Nightmare of Murgo is the child of Yharnam, a Great One's child, which is the thing the Healing Church was trying to replicate. In its own experiments, they found the Pthumerian record of a human bearing a Great One's child and decided they should do it again. Deliberately. Byrgenwerth provided the intellectual framework that made this seem achievable. The wet nurse that guards Murgo's crib is described as having no face. Its many wings fold around a cage-like form. It is a guardian in the purest sense, an entity defined entirely by its protective function. The Pthumerians summoned it, or it came. Either way, it stayed with the child, long after the child was gone. The Nightmare of Murgo continues to echo the child's cry, even after the child itself may not exist in any conventional sense. The cry is the sound of something that happened in Pthumerian history and has never stopped happening. Byrgenwerth heard echoes of that cry in the old texts. They followed the sound down. The Labyrinth Watcher enemies in the Chalice dungeons are degenerated Pthumerians who still maintain their ancestral function. Watching. Patrolling. Protecting something that may no longer be there. Their devotion to a duty older than memory is one of Bloodborne's more melancholy recurring images. The holy chalices used to access the dungeons are not church artifacts originally. They are Pthumerian tools that the church discovered and adopted. The ritual of creating a chalice dungeon, the flower, the blood, the rite, these are Pthumerian procedures preserved through Byrgenwerth's archaeological work and institutionalized by the church. The deeper you go into the chalice dungeons, the older the architecture becomes. The uppermost levels have stone that resembles Yharnam's surface aesthetic. The deepest levels have a completely different language of design. Older stone. Different symbols. The architecture is a geological record of civilizations stacked on top of each other. The bloodletting beast found in certain deep chalice dungeons is an enormous creature that suggests what the Pthumerian experiments look like at their most extreme. It is not a transformation any Byrgenwerth scholar would have recognized from the texts. It is a result nobody expected. The Pthumerian elder boss uses chalice magic in combat. Balls of golden light. Precise, deliberate attacks. It is not fighting like a beast. It is fighting like a scholar. That elder is a practitioner, not a monster, and the distinction matters. The lore surrounding the Is Gravestone Chalice dungeons suggests those specific branches of the labyrinth connect directly to the cosmic layer where the Great Ones communicate. The Is dungeons are where the labyrinth touches the outer world. Byrgenwerth was probably trying to find them. Whether they succeeded is not confirmed. Ebrietas appears as a boss in a chalice dungeon as well as in the main game. Her chalice dungeon version is encountered in exactly the location where the scholars found her, in the Is ruins, in the place where the cosmic and the physical overlap. Seeing her there, in the original context of her discovery, changes how her main game appearance reads. The main game Ebrietas fight has her apparently praying when you first enter the room, bowing her head. in the same posture that the Thumerian followers depicted in old carvings assume in worship. She has been performing that gesture for a very long time, in an empty room, with no one to receive it. That image, Ebrietas kneeling in an abandoned room, praying to something that is not there, is one of the most quietly devastating in the game. Byrgenwerth found her in that position. The church inherited her in that position. She is still in it. The cold damp blood gem items found in the Chalice dungeons are described as remnants of Thumerian blood preserved in stone. Byrgenwerth studied these remnants. The blood gems that upgrade weapons are, in origin, Thumerian artifacts that Byrgenwerth helped recover and that the church distributed. The sinister Chalice dungeons that allow for PvP invasion are described as corrupted versions of the standard ritual. The word sinister in the original Japanese carries connotations of left hand, of deviation from the correct path. Someone is performing the ritual wrong. The wrong path into the labyrinth leads to a different kind of encounter. The fetid offering and rotted offering modifier items that can be added to Chalice dungeon rituals are described as attracting specific kinds of entities. They corrupt the ritual deliberately to produce a more dangerous environment. This practice of deliberately attracting dangerous cosmic entities into the labyrinth sounds exactly like what Mensis would do, and sounds nothing like what Willem would have. Permitted. The Watchers in the Chalice dungeons who carry blades and move in coordinated groups are believed to be a formal warrior caste of the Thumerians. Not transformed, not corrupted. Trained soldiers performing military functions in a ruin thousands of years old. Their continued presence suggests either extraordinary longevity or something about the labyrinth that prevents time from passing normally inside it. The Great Pthumeru Ihil Chalice is one of the final and most powerful. Its description mentions Ihil as a place where the Thumerians made their last stand against something. Not against each other, against something else. The Thumerian civilization did not just decay. Something ended it, and the labyrinth was where the last of them made their final effort. Byrgenwerth found the record of that last stand. They found the ruins of a civilization that reached for the divine and was consumed by it. And they read those records and thought they could do better. That is not arrogance. That is scholarship. Every generation reads the cautionary tale and believes it will be the exception. Byrgenwerth believed it understood what the Thumerians did wrong. They were wrong about that too. The cursed Thumerian defilement is one of the most brutal Chalice dungeon configurations. Maximum curse, which halves your maximum health. Its description notes the defilement refers to the desecration of the sacred labyrinth by later practitioners. Not by the Thumerians, by the people who came after and used it wrong. The people who came after are the church, the school, the hunters who took the chalices and used them for power rather than understanding. Byrgenwerth started the desecration, and the church finished it, and the labyrinth registered the difference between reverence and exploitation in the architecture of curse. The deepest accessible Chalice dungeon enemies include creatures that appear to be in states of partial ascension rather than full beast transformation. They are between states. They have the eyes. They have some of the additional limbs, but they are not complete. The labyrinth is full of processes arrested mid-stage. Several items found exclusively in deep Chalice dungeons have descriptions that reference the first scholars, not Byrgenwerth scholars, but something earlier. The first humans who found the labyrinth before the Thumerians built on top of it. Pre-Thumerian contact with the Great Ones is implied, but never fully articulated. Byrgenwerth may have found evidence of this even older layer and chosen not to publish it. The bone ash items used in Chalice creation are explicitly described as the remnants of Thumerian holy persons. You are burning saints to open doors. The church normalized this practice. Byrgenwerth extracted it from Thumerian ritual and handed it forward without moral comment in the academic record. The watchdog of the Old Lord's boss is described in lore terms as a guardian preserved in the ritual fire of the Old Labyrinth Lords. The Old Lords are a Thumerian faction that dealt specifically with fire-based transformation. Their existence predates the blood-focused rituals that Byrgenwerth inherited. There were always multiple paths. Fire was one, blood was another, eyes were another. The labyrinth contains all of them. The lore and dungeons, accessible through specific chalice branches, depict a civilization that was destroyed by the scourge of beasts before Yharnam was. Lauren fell first. Byrgenwerth may have known about Lauren. The knowledge that this had already happened once before, that another civilization had already been consumed by the beast plague, and they proceeded anyway, is among the most damning possibilities in the entire lore. The Black Beast of Lauren is a boss that references the catastrophic end of the Lauren civilization. It is enormous, black, and barely coherent as a creature. It is what the scourge looks like at full scale, uncontained, final. Yharnam was heading for this. Byrgenwerth was part of the chain that led to this. The Lauren Silver Beast enemy type, which uses lightning, is described as a creature that diverged from the beast transformation path in an unusual direction. Lauren's version of the transformation is different from Yharnam's. The blood was different there. The old blood in the Lauren chalices has a different signature. Byrgenwerth's research into old blood variety may have included Lauren samples. The false depth chalice dungeons, created through specific item interactions discovered by the community, reveal additional environmental areas that were not accessible in the game's original configuration. These areas contain lore items and enemy placements that appear to be cut content from the base game. Some of these items reference Byrgenwerth explicitly in descriptions that did not make it into the final release. The false depth dungeons and their cut content suggest that Byrgenwerth's role in the game was originally larger. There were more direct connections between the school and the labyrinth that were simplified or removed during development. What remains is a reduced version of a more fully articulated relationship. The Thumerian connection to Byrgenwerth is, at its core, a story about academic inheritance. Byrgenwerth did not build the labyrinth. They found it. They did not create the blood rituals. They decoded them. They did not summon the Great Ones. They found the places where Great Ones had already been summoned. Everything they did was interpretation of prior work. An interpretation, however careful, always introduces the interpreter's assumptions into the interpreted material. Byrgenwerth read the Thumerian record through the lens of Willem's eye philosophy, and what they read there was shaped by what they already believed. The labyrinth is deeper than any reading of it. It was deeper than the Thumerians. It is deeper than Byrgenwerth. And it will be deeper than whatever comes after. Chapter 10. Gehrman and the First Workshop. Gehrman the First Hunter is the oldest surviving human character in Bloodborne's present tense, and his connection to Byrgenwerth is one of the most carefully obscured relationships in the game. The timing of Gehrman's appearance as the first hunter corresponds with the period of Byrgenwerth's active research. He did not emerge from nowhere. Someone taught him to fight, and someone gave him the conceptual tools to fight the specific kinds of enemies that Byrgenwerth's research produced. The burial blade, Gehrman's weapon, has an arcane scaling that is unusual for a physical weapon. Its description notes that it was crafted to face beasts, but the arcane component connects it to the rune and insight-based knowledge system that Byrgenwerth developed. Gehrman's weapon was made with Byrgenwerth's theoretical framework built into the steel. The workshop that Gehrman founded, the old workshop visible as an abandoned ruin in the main game, precedes the Healing Church workshop. The first workshop preceded the institutional one. Gehrman's hunters were independent. They operated before the church existed to sanction them. The transition from Gehrman's independent workshop to the church workshop mirrors the transition from Byrgenwerth to the healing church. Informal knowledge became institutional. The cost of that formalization was always the same. The original intent became subordinated to the institution's survival. The doll in the hunter's dream is fashioned after a real person. Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower. Gehrman made the doll himself. He was in love with Maria. She worked with him in the original workshop. She left. He made a doll of her and sits with it in the dream garden. That is a human story inside a cosmic one. Maria's connection to the fishing hamlet, to Kos, and through those connections back to the eye philosophy and Byrgenwerth's legacy, means that Gehrman's love story is embedded inside the same intellectual chain that the school initiated. His grief is Byrgenwerth's grief at one remove. The hunter's dream as a constructed space bears examining for its Byrgenwerth connections. The architecture of the dream, the workshop, the graves, the garden, these are all Gehrman's creation, or the moon presence's recreation of Gehrman's creation. The aesthetic choices reflect a man shaped by Byrgenwerth's era. The graves in the hunter's dream belong to hunters who died. Their headstones are plain. No names, no dates, just stone markers for people who gave everything and were not individually remembered. Byrgenwerth scholars who transformed got even less. The spiders in the building have no markers. The moon presence's involvement with Gehrman and the dream is tied to the same cosmic events that Byrgenwerth triggered. The moon presence arrived or became involved in Yharnam during the period of Byrgenwerth's active work. Whether it came because of the school, or the school attracted it, or the timing is coincidental, is the question the game refuses to answer. Gehrman's dialogue in his waking form suggests he wants to be free. He wants you to accept the dream's ending, to submit to him and wake up, because he cannot wake up himself. He is trapped in the dream that the moon presence and his own guilt have constructed. His imprisonment is the consequence of choices made in the same period as Byrgenwerth's collapse. The Burial Blade's moveset is unlike any other weapon in the game. It has a reach and an arc designed for fighting multiple enemies simultaneously. Its design assumes the existence of groups of transformed humans. Gehrman designed a weapon for fighting the things that Byrgenwerth produced. He knew they were coming before most people did. The Old Hunter bone item, found in the DLC, lets you use Old Hunter dodge techniques. Its description says these were techniques practiced before the workshop was formalized, before the church codified hunting. The Old Hunters were more improvisational, more experimental. They were figuring it out as they went. They were, in a sense, applying the same experimental approach to combat that Byrgenwerth applied to scholarship. Several Old Hunter NPCs in the DLC reference Gehrman with a combination of reverence and pity. He is the first, and he is the most imprisoned. The oldest hunter is the most trapped. The person who knew the most about what they were all getting into is the one who could not get out. The hunter's nightmare, where many of the Dilk takes place, is described as a place where hunters who committed terrible acts in their pursuit of the hunt are imprisoned. It is a moral dimension. The worst hunters are there. Simon is there, but he is sympathetic. Ludwig is there, but he is redeemable. The nightmare is not just punishment. It is preservation of the most complicated parts of the hunt's history. Byrgenwerth created the conditions that made the hunt necessary. The hunt created the conditions that produced the nightmare. The chain is complete. Willem wrote the first sentence of a very long document, and the hunter's nightmare is its last chapter. The fact that you can free Gehrman if you gather the 3 umbilical cords and refuse his offer, and face the moon presence directly, connects the true ending of the game back to Byrgenwerth's umbilical cord lore, back to Yharnam the Thumerian queen, back to the healing church, back to the school. Every thread leads back. The final act of the game is the resolution of something that started in a lecture hall overlooking a lake. Ludwig's Holy Blade, the most popular weapon in the game, is described as a product of the church workshop inspired by Gehrman's burial blade. It is a straight line from Byrgenwerth's research to Gehrman's design to Ludwig's interpretation to the weapon that millions of players carried through the game. The school's intellectual legacy is in your hands the entire time. The Hunter's Mark, the consumable that sends you back to the lamp without dying, is described as a symbol of the hunt etched onto the skin of hunters. Its design contains the same circular, ocular motifs found throughout Byrgenwerth. The mark that hunters wear, the thing that connects them to the dream, is drawn from the school's visual vocabulary. Gehrman's awareness of what lies under Moonside Lake is not confirmed, but given his age, his connections, and the timing of the dream's creation relative to Byrgenwerth's collapse, it would be more surprising if he did not know about Rom. Whether he knows and does not say, or knows and cannot say, or genuinely does not know, is another of the game's sustained ambiguities. The plain doll's dialogue is gentle and slightly confused, as though she is performing a function she does not fully understand. She heals. She takes your echoes. She says things that suggest warmth, but she is a constructed object, and the construction reveals Gehrman's grief more than it reveals any authentic relationship. The doll is the oldest artifact of the period immediately following Byrgenwerth's collapse. She is Gehrman's response to losing Maria to the horrors that Byrgenwerth set in motion. His response was to make something that could not leave. Chapter 11. Lady Maria and the weight of what was done. Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower is, depending on how you read her lore, either a victim of the same system that destroyed Byrgenwerth's students, or one of its most direct perpetrators, or both simultaneously. Maria was a Canehurst noble who became a student of Gehrman's. She came from the blood aristocracy. She chose the hunt. She worked alongside Gehrman in the original workshop before the church formalized everything. She was there at the beginning of the hunting tradition. Her connection to the fishing hamlet is where her story becomes complicated. Maria participated in the assault on the fishing hamlet. The hunters went to the village and took from the villagers something that was not theirs to take. They were looking for knowledge connected to Kos, to the eye-adjacent research that descends from Byrgenwerth's tradition, and they conducted themselves with violence. Maria's weapon, the rakuyo, is a paired blade that she eventually abandons. She throws it into a well at the fishing hamlet. The gesture of throwing away your weapon is not ambiguous. She is done. She cannot fix what happened, but she can stop being the person who does it. The clock tower where she is found is described as a place of experimentation. The patients there were subjected to the same eye insertion procedures that echo Byrgenwerth's philosophy. Maria, who abandoned her weapon in guilt, is the guardian of the place that continued the research she could not stop. There is an argument that Maria's guardianship of the clock tower is a form of penance. She cannot undo what was done to the hamlet. She cannot close the clock tower. But she can keep you from getting through it. She can be the last obstacle between a hunter and the deeper horrors of the nightmare. Her fight is described by many players as the most elegantly designed in the game. She moves beautifully. Her attacks are precise and respectful. She is not trying to kill you with brute force. She is fighting as she was trained to fight, as Gehrman taught her, with economy and intelligence. Even in the nightmare, she fights well. When you beat her, she opens the way to the fishing hamlet. The way through her guilt is through her. That structure, fighting through a person's preserved shame to reach the source of it, is the most precise emotional architecture in Bloodborne. The fishing hamlet that you access after Maria is the most visually and tonally strange area in the game. It does not look like Yharnam. It does not look like the rest of the DLC. It looks like a specific real place that has been nightmare preserved with complete accuracy. It feels like a memory that does not want to be remembered. The fishermen of the hamlet who attack you are hostile, but their hostility is earned. You are a hunter. Hunters came here and did something terrible. Your presence in their village, even at remove in the nightmare, means something to them. Their aggression is the logical response of people who have been hurt by people who look like you. The Kos parasite, the weapon you can find in the hamlet, uses the parasites from Kos's body as a weapon. The description notes that the parasites have survived her death and maintain some of her essence. You can equip a dead god's children as a weapon. The ethics of that are not addressed by the game and should probably be considered. Kos herself, dead on the shore, is enormous. Her body dwarfs everything around it. The scale difference between her and the human fisherman who lived near her suggests the relationship was never one of equals. They were near her, they were sheltered by her. But the scale says everything about the power dynamic. The moon rune, found in the hamlet, is one of the most powerful runes in the game, and is associated with the old blood of the Great Ones and the wisdom of the deep sea. Finding it in the hamlet, the place where Byrgenwerth's legacy most directly intersected with a living Great One, is appropriate. The deepest wisdom in the game is found where the deepest crime was committed. Simon the Harrowed, who gives you information about the hamlet and its history, has no weapons when you first encounter him. He is a hunter without a weapon, walking through a nightmare. His disarmament echoes Maria's weapon disposal in the well. The hunters who understood what they did put down their tools. Simon's dialogue about Gehrman and the original workshop contains the clearest statement of how the hunting tradition lost its way. He describes a time when hunters were more careful, more thoughtful. He implies that the formalization under the church introduced a brutality that the original workshop, Gehrman's workshop, Byrgenwerth adjacent workshop, did not have. That reading, where Byrgenwerth's influence on Gehrman was a moderating one, where the school's emphasis on observation and patience was reflected in the first generation of hunters, and where the church's removal of those values produced worse hunters, complicates the simple reading of Byrgenwerth as pure catastrophe. The accursed brew, Maria's projectile attack, uses her own blood. She weaponizes herself. In a game full of blood as resource and blood as curse, a character who uses their own blood as a weapon, deliberately as a skill, is making a statement about their relationship. To the substance, Maria is not afraid of what blood does to people. She has already seen it. The hunter's tool called a Call Beyond, which calls down cosmic energy, is found in the clock tower near Maria. It requires high arcane investment. It is a direct channeling of Great One energy. The fact that it is found in Maria's domain, near a woman who rejected the hunt, suggests the clock tower contained tools she had decided not to use. Maria's nobility, her Canehurst heritage, connects her to the vile blood lineage that Logarius was imprisoning himself to contain. She carries the blood of the thing Byrgenwerth's progeny spent their lives fighting. She chose the hunt anyway. She chose Gehrman's path over her lineage. And the hunt destroyed her just as thoroughly as the blood might have. The tragedy of Lady Maria is that she made the right choice, and it did not save her. She left her noble blood. She trained with the best hunter. She followed the rules. She participated in something terrible when ordered to. She tried to stop. She ended up guardian of a nightmare, fighting forever, and when you find her, she is already dead in every meaningful sense. She is a memory maintaining a post. Her last words before the fight acknowledge your presence with something that reads as relief. She has been waiting. Not for rescue, not for absolution, just for someone to finally get through. To see what she has been guarding, to reach the hamlet and understand what was done there. She wants someone to know. That reading of Maria as a witness, more than a guardian, is the one that makes the most sense of her lore. Byrgenwerth built an institution that produced monsters. The hunters who worked in that tradition did monstrous things. Maria is the person who remembers those things in a space where memories are preserved forever. She is Byrgenwerth's conscience, and you have to fight through her to find the truth. Chapter 12. The architecture of madness. Bloodborne's level design team built Byrgenwerth as a physical argument. Every room, every doorway, every piece of furniture arrangement is making a point about the people who lived there and what happened to them. The proportions of the main lecture hall are slightly wrong. The ceiling is too high, the room is too long. The effect is subtle, but it produces a mild unease that players often describe without being able to identify its source. The room was designed to feel slightly off from the beginning. The lighting in Byrgenwerth is cooler than in most of the game. The healing church areas use warm, amber-toned light. Byrgenwerth uses a blue-grey light that feels clinical. Scholarly. The colour temperature of the environment communicates the difference between the school and the institution that replaced it. The windows throughout the building are dirty but intact. No broken windows in Byrgenwerth. Every building in Yarnam has broken windows. Every ruined area has shattered glass. Byrgenwerth's windows are intact and grimy. The building was sealed rather than destroyed. Someone closed it properly. The door to the back area, where the path to the lake begins, is heavier than the interior doors. A different material. It was added after the original construction. Somebody reinforced the back exit specifically. Whether to keep people in or keep people out is a question the door's design leaves open. The staircase in the eastern wing of the building has a landing at an odd height. Not quite one floor. Not quite half a floor. The landing contains nothing, just a window and wall. But the architectural anomaly suggests there was once another room at that height, removed during a renovation or collapse. The renovation timeline of Byrgenwerth is something the community has attempted to reconstruct from environmental clues. The original building appears to have been smaller, with the eastern wing and the rear lecture hall being later additions. The school grew. The original structure was not built for the ambitions it eventually housed. The floorboards in certain rooms creak in a pattern. This is noted in speedrun communities as consistent and reproducible. The creak pattern is not random. It is a specific rhythm produced by the specific placement of structural supports beneath the floor. The pattern sounds almost like language if you listen to it long enough. Community members have noted this without claiming it is intentional. The bookcases are arranged in a specific pattern in the main study, not alphabetically or by subject as far as the external bindings suggest. They appear to be arranged spatially by where the subjects were studied, which part of the school each type of inquiry was associated with. The library arrangement maps the school's intellectual geography. There is a globe in one of the study rooms. It does not match any world map that anyone has been able to identify. The continents are wrong. This is either a fictional world's globe, suggesting the game takes place in a world with a different geography than implied, or it represents something else entirely. A map of the nightmare layers. A representation of something the scholars were trying to map. The coat hooks near the main entrance of Byrgenwerth have several coats still hanging on them. The coats are not scholar robes, they are heavier, outdoor coats. They belong to visitors, not residents. Someone came to visit Byrgenwerth after it was abandoned and left their coat. The number of coats, 3, corresponds to nothing confirmed in the lore, but has been read variously as representing the 3 schools that descended from Byrgenwerth. The 3 thirds of the umbilical cord, or just 3 visitors. 3 is a recurring number in the game's symbolism, and the appearance of 3 coats in this specific location is either resonant or coincidental. The fireplace in the main common room has ash in it that is a different colour than standard wood ash. Darker. More arcane materials were burned in that fireplace, not for warmth, for a purpose. The fire in the hearth was a working fire. The ceiling of the observatory adjacent to the main building is painted. The paint shows a night sky, but the painted stars do not move with the in-game celestial system. They are fixed. The painting was made to represent a specific sky on a specific night, not as a general astronomical reference, but as a record of one particular evening's observation. Community analysis of the painted ceiling has attempted to date the sky it represents based on the position of visible constellations. The dating, if the painted constellations correspond to real-world star positions at all, suggests a date roughly corresponding to a significant event in Bloodborne's lore. Timeline. The work is speculative, but the methodology is sound, and the result is interesting. The benches in the lecture hall face front, but 2 of them have been turned 90 degrees, not dragged to a different position, turned in place. Whoever turned them wanted to see the sides of the room, not the front. 2 students at some point were more interested in looking at each other or at something in the room's periphery than at the teacher. The lectern at the front of the hall has notes on it, unpublished notes in Willem's handwriting, presumably, though the game does not label them explicitly. The notes are not readable, but their presence on the lectern suggests that the last lecture given in this hall was from those specific notes. The last thing taught here is the thing written on that lectern, and you will never know what it said. The glass cases in the research room contain specimens. Most of the specimens are too degraded to identify clearly. One case contains something with a shape that resembles an eye. A preserved eye, significantly larger than a human eye, an early specimen. Evidence of a great one eye collected and examined before the researchers understood what they were holding. The water damage in the basement areas of Byrgenwerth suggests the lake has been rising. Very slowly, over a very long time. The lake is getting closer to the school. Whether this is a natural process connected to the magical nature of the area, or something more intentional is not addressed in the game. If the lake is rising toward Byrgenwerth, and if Rom is in the lake, then the lake's encroachment on the school is a slow progress of the divine toward the place that tried to. Reach the divine. The mountain is coming to the scholar. The timeline is just very long. The hidden room that can be accessed in the basement via a specific approach has a single item on the floor. A pebble. Not a useful item, just a pebble. The same kind of pebble Willem holds in the opening of his gesture. This pebble is placed in a location that requires significant exploration to find. Someone put it there. As a message. As a marker. As the last detail in a building full of details, this one is the quietest. Chapter 13. The Eyes of the Cosmos. The eye motif in Bloodborne is not decorative. It is load-bearing. The eyes you see carved into surfaces, depicted in runes, manifested on enemies, accumulating in your insight meter, these are all expressions of a single consistent metaphysical argument that Byrgenwerth originated and the rest of the game explores. The eye pendants found in the game are described as artifacts used in choir rituals to enhance perception. They are not eyes, but they are shaped like eyes. The choir was making tools in the shape of the thing they were trying to accumulate. The eye as symbol had become as important as the eye as organ. The choir's experimentation with enhancing perception through physical means, through surgery, through the eye implements found in the clock tower, is the literal application of what Willem theorized. He said more eyes means more sight. The choir said, let's build a procedure around that. The gap between theory and clinical application is where most of the horror lives. The enemies in the Nightmare of Mensis, called living failures, are beings who almost became something more. They reached for Great One status, for the kind of transformation that would elevate them, and they failed at the final step. They have too many eyes. They have the extra limbs. They have the general shape of what they were trying to become, but they did not complete the transformation. And the incompleteness is agony. Living failures are one of the most sympathetic enemy types in a game full of sympathetic enemy types. They are failed students. They did the work. They took the steps. They paid the price, and they got most of the transformation with none of the transcendence. They are exactly what Byrgenwerth warned against by producing through its failures. The Celestial Emissary boss is a cluster of small blue creatures that merge into a giant blue creature when the fight progresses. The blue colour is consistent with the kinesthetic throughout the game. The emissary nature of the boss suggests these creatures are messengers between the Great Ones and the world below. Byrgenwerth would have been desperate to communicate with them. The item descriptions for kin enemies consistently reference their relationship to the cosmos and to the Great Ones as being proximal rather than direct. They are adjacent to divinity. Nearby, in the gravitational field of something greater. This is the same relationship that Byrgenwerth was trying to establish for humanity, to get humanity close enough to the Great Ones to receive their influence. The Augur of Ebrietas is the most direct Byrgenwerth spell in the game. It summons a tentacle, presumably an extension of Ebrietas herself. Its description says it was one of the first hunter tools created by the choir. The first thing the church's elite inner circle made was a way to reach through the barrier between planes and grab something. The Black Ski Eye, a hunter's tool that fires cosmic energy, is found in the Nightmare of Mensis. Its description says it is a remnant of the Great Ones, a tiny piece of cosmic matter repurposed as a weapon. Byrgenwerth's collectors would have been ecstatic to have this item. It is literally a piece of what they were trying to reach. The eye of a blood-drunk hunter, which can be found on a body in central Yharnam, and has a description calling it a useless thing, is one of the more pointed item descriptions in the game. An eye. A human eye. Found on a hunter who went too far. Described as useless. The eye that Willem believed was the organ of the gods in its most basic form is useless. The irony is complete. The formless Odin rune is described as relating to a Great One who has no form, who exists only as sound and as the medium of blood. Odin is the Great One associated with blood, with the substance that Willem rejected in favour of eyes. The formless Great One is connected to the thing Willem abandoned. The implication is that the blood and the eyes were always connected, and Willem's pivot was not a rejection of blood, but a misunderstanding of it. Eden's connection to Cainhurst, where vile blood is hoarded and preserved, gives Cainhurst a cosmic dimension it is easy to miss. The Vilbloods carry something of Odin in their blood. The executioners who hunt them are, in the larger picture, hunting Odin's legacy. And the executioners descend from Byrgenwerth through Ligarius. The school is fighting its own shadow. The red jewelled brooch, found near a specific body in the game, is connected to the Cainhurst line and to bloodborne illness. Its description is brief and sad. It belonged to a woman who came to Yharnam seeking a cure. She followed the blood to its source. The eye philosophy and the blood philosophy both end at the same place. A body in the street. The madman's knowledge items, which you consume to gain insight, are described as fragments of a madman's skull containing the knowledge that drove them mad. You are literally eating brain matter to gain insight. The eye philosophy taken to its neurological conclusion. You put knowledge into your skull by consuming the skull of someone else. This item and its greater version, Great One's wisdom, describe the chain of transmission clearly. Madman to skull to you. The madmen who found knowledge they could not contain, left it behind in the only form it could survive. Fragment. Bone. Consumed. Byrgenwerth was doing this same thing with the Pumerian records, consuming the remnants of a civilization's failed wisdom to extract the useful parts. The Cainhurst set's description mentions bloodstone as an ingredient in its construction. Bloodstone appears throughout Bloodborne's weapon upgrade system. It is everywhere, It is ordinary, and its description eventually notes that bloodstone is crystallized blood from the old labyrinth. The mundane economy of Yharnam runs on Thumerian byproduct. Byrgenwerth normalized that. The church industrialized it. The firepaper item covers weapons in arcane fire. Its description notes that arcane and fire are associated with the gods, not in the positive worship sense, but in the sense that the gods burn. Contact with divinity is combustion. Byrgenwerth was always going to get burned. The school understood this on some level. The firepaper exists because someone thought about what contact with the divine actually feels like and prepared accordingly. The entire insight system of the game, the way your perception of the world changes as you accumulate cosmic knowledge, is the most ambitious Easter egg in Bloodborne. It is not a hidden item or a background texture. It is the architecture of the game itself. The game is telling you the truth about what Byrgenwerth was pursuing by making you experience it directly. And the experience is not pleasant, but it is profound. Chapter 14. The Forbidden Woods and What They Guarded. The Forbidden Woods are the barrier between Yharnam and Byrgenwerth, and that positioning is not neutral. The woods are the gate. Whatever Byrgenwerth was, the world around it decided it needed to be separated from the city by a zone of unnatural danger. The snake-neck creatures in the Forbidden Woods are the most alien transformation in the main game. They are not beast transformations in the conventional sense. They are something older. Their snake heads have the glassy, calm expression of something that is no longer suffering. They have gone past the point where transformation is painful. The large snake that wraps around tree trunks in the Forbidden Woods and requires careful navigation to pass is one of the more unexpected encounters in the game. That encounter is not an anomaly. It is consistent with the wood's general character. This place is alive in a way that forests are not usually alive. The scale of the organisms here is wrong. The villagers in the Forbidden Woods, the ones in the buildings and on the paths before the dense forest section, are not transformed. They are just hostile. Normal humans with pitchforks and torches. The presence of non-transformed hostile humans in close proximity to heavily transformed hostile creatures tells you about the timeline of the wood's history. The transformation has not reached everyone yet. The woods are in progress. The Iosefka's clinic back entrance is accessed through the Forbidden Woods. The connection between the most experimental and dangerous space in Yharnam and the clinic at the beginning of the game is direct. The clinic is the civilized face of what the woods represents. Both are places where transformation is occurring. One is decorated with wallpaper. One is full of enormous snakes. The hidden Dark Beast Pile can be accessed early through the Forbidden Woods via a well. The Dark Beast, a lightning-wrapped skeletal beast of enormous proportions, is accessible through a hole in the ground in a forest that is already full of impossible things. The woods contain levels of weirdness stacked on top of each other like geological strata. The suspicious beggar, an NPC who asks to be sent to a safe location, is found in the Forbidden Woods. He will eat the other NPCs you send to safety if you direct him to a populated area. His true nature is a beast in a deceptive human form. He is, in a specific way, the reverse of the scholar spiders. They transformed involuntarily. He is managing his transformation intentionally. The suspicious beggar's presence in the Forbidden Woods, rather than in Yharnam, is interesting. He is at the boundary between the city and the school. He occupies the transitional zone. His nature as something between human and beast maps onto the wood's identity as something between civilization and cosmic horror. The cave network beneath the Forbidden Woods contains snake eggs. Enormous snake eggs. The presence of a breeding population of the giant snakes in cave systems beneath the path to Byrgenwerth says something about how long this has been going on. The snake transformation is not recent. The eggs are not recent. This has been happening here for a long time. The lamp that provides fast travel access in the Forbidden Woods is placed at the edge of the forest proper, before the densest section. The placement means that if you use fast travel to return here, you always re-enter the woods from the outer edge. You always have to walk back in. The game does not give you a shortcut to the deepest parts of this specific area. The giant spider webbing in the lower sections of the Forbidden Woods, near the cave entrances, uses the same visual language as the webbing inside Byrgenwerth. The scholar spiders and the wood spiders are connected. The transformation that made the scholars did not stay in the school. It walked into the forest. Whether the scholar spiders migrated into the Forbidden Woods after the school's collapse, or whether the transformation originated in the woods and entered the school, is an open question. The law does not confirm the direction of travel. Both are possible, and both say different things about the nature of the transformation. The underground river beneath the Forbidden Woods, visible briefly in certain sections, is flowing toward the lake. All water in this area, naturally or otherwise, moves toward Moonside Lake. The geography of the zone is oriented around the lake, the way the architecture of Byrgenwerth is oriented around it. The insects in the Forbidden Woods emit a specific sound at night. The day-night cycle in Bloodborne affects certain enemies, but the insect sound in the Forbidden Woods is consistent regardless of in-game time. That consistency is unusual. Most ambient sounds in the game respond to time of day. Whatever the insect sound represents, it does not change. The scarecrows in the cultivated sections near the village portion of the Forbidden Woods are dressed in recognizable yarn-arm fashion. The village was once part of the same civilization as the city. People farmed here. The scarecrows are markers of normal agricultural life at the edge of the most abnormal place in the region. Several of the Forbidden Woods villagers carry items found also in the Hemwick Charnel Lane area, establishing that the woods were part of a broader rural Yarnum culture before. The transformation. The Hemlock region and the Woods region were adjacent and connected, part of the same pre-plague countryside. The lamppost style in the Forbidden Woods is different from Yarnum proper. Shorter, simpler. A utilitarian rural aesthetic versus the slightly more elaborate urban fixtures of the city. Design consistency across a detail that most players never notice is the kind of work that makes Bloodborne's world feel real rather than assembled. The exit from the Forbidden Woods into the Byrgenwerth approach is marked by a change in path quality. The woods path is worn earth and roots. The Byrgenwerth approach is stone-set and deliberate. The transition from natural to constructed marks the boundary of the school's influence on the landscape. The stone path leading to Byrgenwerth has weeds growing through it. The weeds are in specific cracks. The cracks and the weeds together tell a story of maintenance abandoned at a specific time. The path was kept clear. Then, it was not. The weeds have grown to a consistent size, suggesting roughly the same amount of time has passed since maintenance stopped in each part of the path. The gate to Byrgenwerth from the approach is iron. The lock is specific, and the key is specific. The Forbidden Woods key found in the Forbidden Woods for the back passage of Iosefka's clinic, and the key found to open Byrgenwerth's gate are separate. Two different locks, two different control points. The school had a security system. Whoever built it was thinking about controlling access from multiple directions. The Forbidden Woods and Byrgenwerth together form a complete zone with its own ecological logic, architectural progression, and law density. They are the geographic record of the school's relationship with its environment. The school changed the woods by being there. The woods changed the school by what they contained. Both end at the lake. All roads in this zone end at the water. Chapter 15. Deeper than the law. The community that built understanding around Bloodborne's law did not just read item descriptions. They mapped geometry. They compared colour palettes. They tracked enemy placement across patch versions. They compared the Japanese and English item descriptions. The depth at which the Byrgenwerth lore has been excavated is itself a reflection of what the school was doing. Students, working carefully, finding things in the dark. The Japanese text of certain Byrgenwerth adjacent items contains words that carry nuances missing from the English localization. The word translated as insight in English has a Japanese root that implies more specifically a kind of sight that comes after blindness. Not regular vision, the vision that follows darkness. Willem's philosophy in the original language is even more specific than the translated version suggests. The Japanese description of the eye rune has an additional clause not present in the English version that implies the eyes Willem sought were not meant to be accumulated permanently, but to be cycled through, experienced and released. The English version describes it as accumulation. The Japanese version describes it as passage. Those are different philosophies. The lore of the fishing hamlet, as rendered in Japanese, is significantly more explicit about the nature of what was taken from the villagers. The English version is more euphemistic. The Japanese version is direct. Knowing the Japanese version changes how you read the entire Dilk and retroactively changes how you read Byrgenwerth's research into eyes. The community wiki pages for Byrgenwerth, which are among the most edited and debated in any game wiki, contain arguments running into thousands of words about the direction of influence between Kos and Willem. Did Willem know about Kos before his epiphany, or did his epiphany come independently and the fishing hamlet connection came later? The evidence for both positions is real. The argument is genuinely unresolvable with current available lore. Several data miners have found unused dialogue files for Willem that suggest he was originally intended to be slightly more communicative. Not much, a line or two. One of the unused lines appears to be a warning. Its specific content has been partially reconstructed, but the full sentence remains disputed. The cleaned-up version of Willem, the silent figure with only a pebble gesture, is more powerful than the slightly more communicative original might have been. The cut content from Bloodborne, which was substantial given the game's development history, included more Byrgenwerth material. References to a student named Damien appear in cut lore, who was described as Willem's most loyal disciple, someone who disagreed with both Lawrence and Willem and proposed a third path. Damien disappears from the final game entirely, but his philosophical position was apparently represented by one of the existing items whose authorship was reassigned during development. The Carol rune system originally contained more runes than the final game includes. Some cut runes appear to have been specifically associated with Byrgenwerth rituals that did not make it into the final design. These runes would have provided additional information about what the scholars were doing in the school's later period before the transformation wave moved through the student population. The original design document for Byrgenwerth, partially reconstructed from interviews with the development team and from analysis of early screenshots, described the area as containing an additional sub-area, a basement laboratory. The basement is referenced in the existing architecture. There are sealed floor sections that suggest an additional level, but it was cut and its contents have not been recovered. The fan reconstruction of the Bloodborne timeline, the most comprehensive version of which runs to tens of thousands of words and is regularly updated by a collaborative group of lore researchers, places Byrgenwerth's founding approximately 3 generations before the main game events. That timeline is derived from cross-referencing NPC ages, implied by appearance, with event dates, implied by item descriptions. It is not confirmed, but the methodology is careful, and the result is internally consistent. The Bloodborne lore podcasts and video series, produced by community members like Redgrave and Aegon of Astora, and others, have collectively produced hundreds of hours of analysis, specifically about Byrgenwerth and its implications. The school, which appears for less than 30 minutes of active gameplay in a 30-hour game, has generated more analytical content than most entire games. The question of whether FromSoft intended all of the connections the community has identified is ultimately unanswerable, but also somewhat beside the point. Intentional or not, the connections are there, and a text that supports consistent interpretations, whether or not those interpretations were planned, is a rich text. Bloodborne is a rich text. Byrgenwerth is its most compressed and generative section. The way the community has engaged with Byrgenwerth, with patience, with careful observation, with willingness to revise conclusions when new evidence emerges, is itself a small mirror of the school's best qualities. The hunters of lore do not transform into spider scholars. They just keep reading, keep looking, keep following the path from the forbidden woods to the lake, every time they find something new to see. The final thing about Byrgenwerth, the thing that holds after all the analysis, all the Easter eggs, all the hidden textures and cut content and Japanese localization differences, is that the school was trying to do something genuinely good. Willem wanted to expand human consciousness. He wanted to see further. He wanted people to understand the cosmos they lived inside. The methods were dangerous and the results were catastrophic, but the goal was not malicious. He wanted people to see more, and the game about his failure makes you see more. Every playthrough, every discovery, every item description read carefully at 3 a.m. You are doing what the scholars were trying to do. You are accumulating insight. The difference is that the game gives you a way to put the controller down. The scholars did not have that option. The game is merciful in a way that Byrgenwerth was not, and that mercy might be the final Easter egg, the one hiding in plain sight in the act of playing. Chapter 16. The Geometry of Forbidden Knowledge. The physical dimensions of Byrgenwerth's rooms are not uniform, and the inconsistency is not a production shortcut. Different rooms were built at different times, for different purposes, by people operating under different assumptions about what the space would need to contain. The main lecture hall is the oldest section of the building, based on Stone Age and weathering patterns visible on the exterior. The Eastern Research Wing has newer mortar. The observatory attachment is newer still. Byrgenwerth was not designed all at once. It accumulated the way knowledge accumulates, one addition justifying the next. The original structure, the lecture hall and common areas, was built with high ceilings and wide corridors, consistent with an institution designed for many students. The later additions have lower ceilings and narrower passages. As the school's research deepened and became more private, the architecture became more compressed. The building records the school's inward turn in its own proportions. The height of the ceilings in the main hall is inconsistent with similar academic buildings in the game's broader Yarnam architecture. The cathedral ward structures have lower ceilings relative to floor area. Byrgenwerth's main hall is taller than it needs to be. The extra height served no structural purpose. The community's best reading is that the height was aspirational. The school was designed to feel like a place reaching upward. The windows in the lecture hall are placed higher than in standard Yarnam buildings, not at eye level. You have to look up to see out of them. The effect is that natural light enters from above, and what is visible through the windows is sky, not street. The scholars in those rooms saw sky and worked in pools of light from above. Whether intentional or not, the architectural experience of sitting in Byrgenwerth's lecture hall was a daily reminder to look upward. The staircase ratios in Byrgenwerth are slightly steeper than typical game architecture. Each step requires a slightly higher lift than is comfortable. The effect is subtle, but it produces a mild sense of effort during ascent. The building makes you work to go up. The descent is easy. That asymmetry is architecturally unusual and thematically consistent. There is a room in the eastern wing that has 2 doors leading to the same corridor from different angles. The floor plan produces a loop, not a shortcut. A loop. Someone designed a room you can walk around the inside of and return to your starting point. The architectural logic for a looping room in a research building is not obvious, and the most interesting reading is that it was used for a circular ritual that required movement. The window glass in Byrgenwerth is different from window glass elsewhere in the game. It has a slight green tint visible when natural light passes through it from specific angles. Green-tinted glass was a historical artifact of certain glass-making processes, and the tint implies the glass is genuinely old, older than the rest of the building's finishes. Suggest. The windows may predate the structure that surrounds them. Byrgenwerth was built around existing windows, or the windows were salvaged from an older structure. The chimney configuration visible from the exterior of Byrgenwerth has more flues than the interior fireplaces account for. There are 3 visible chimney stacks, but only 2 fireplaces accessible in the playable area. Either there was a third fireplace in a section of the building now inaccessible, or the third chimney served a different heating purpose. Given the evidence of the basement that appears to have been sealed, a third heating system in the lower level is the most logical reading. The location of Byrgenwerth relative to the cardinal directions, reconstructed from shadow angles during in-game time cycles, places the entrance facing roughly northwest. The lecture hall at the back of the building faces southeast, toward the lake. The orientation is consistent with a deliberate siting choice that puts the most important academic space facing the water. The building's back is its truest face. The exterior stonework of Byrgenwerth contains 2 different types of stone that do not appear together in other Yharnam buildings. One type is consistent with local quarry stone. The other is a darker stone that appears also in the deepest chalice dungeon sections. Someone used labyrinth stone in the construction of Byrgenwerth. Whether that stone was brought up from below or the building was constructed on top of a surface-adjacent section of the labyrinth is an open question that the materials themselves raise. Chapter 17. The Sound Architecture of Byrgenwerth. The ambient audio in Byrgenwerth is the most carefully constructed in the main game. Not the most dramatic, not the loudest, but the most deliberately architectural in how it uses sound to describe space. The reverb tail in the main hall is longer than in rooms of similar physical size elsewhere in the game. The audio engine is not making a physical simulation error. The prolonged reverb is a design choice. The room sounds larger than it is. Whoever mixed the audio for this space chose to make it feel cavernous, as though the room extends beyond its visible walls. Acoustically, Byrgenwerth is bigger on the inside. The silence in the outdoor area between the main building and the lake's edge has a specific frequency profile. Environmental silence in Bloodborne is never truly silent. There is always a noise floor. The noise floor at Byrgenwerth is higher in the mid-range frequencies and lower in the bass than comparable outdoor areas. The acoustic character of the air around the lake is different. Something is affecting the sound environment. The spider scholars produce a clicking sound during their idle animations that is not spider like in the conventional game representation of spider sounds. The clicks are irregular in rhythm and vary in pitch. The audio team produced an ambient vocalization that is unsettling precisely because it follows no predictable pattern. The scholars are making sounds, but not communication sounds. They are making the sounds of an organism processing something. The wind that moves through the windows and corridors of Byrgenwerth has a directional character that changes based on your position in the building. In the front section, the wind seems to come from outside. In the back section, near the lecture hall, the wind seems to come from below. There is no architectural explanation for wind ascending through a solid floor. The audio is describing something about the building's lower levels without confirming their existence. The music that plays during the Rom fight was composed with a specific dynamic structure. The opening section is restrained and almost ambient. As the fight progresses and Rom teleports and the small spiders multiply, additional instrumental layers enter. The musical structure mirrors the lore structure. Rom herself is quiet and still, and the consequences of engaging with her are what become overwhelming. The music is doing what the fight mechanics are doing. The sound that the lake makes before the Rom fight, audible through the fog gate from the Byrgenwerth side, has been isolated and analysed by community members. It contains frequencies that are below normal human hearing threshold, audible as a physical vibration rather than a sound. The subsonic content of the lake audio is not necessary for the game to function. Someone added it. The effect is felt rather than heard. After the Rom fight, if you return to Byrgenwerth, the ambient audio has changed. The silence is different. Several community members have described it as a completed silence rather than a suspended one. This is subjective reporting, but the consistency across independent descriptions suggests the audio was actually modified in a post-Rom world state. The building sounds like it is over. The scholar enemies make a wet sound when they move their limbs. The sound design team apparently recorded material specifically for the scholar movement to produce an effect that implies the vitreous secretion quality of the transformations, without explicitly demonstrating it. You hear what the creature is, before you fully process what you are seeing. The echo in the stairwell connecting the main level to the upper areas of Byrgenwerth is shorter than the main hall, a tighter, harder echo. The stairwell audio suggests stone without furnishings, a purely functional space, and the contrast with the hall's extended reverb is immediate on transition. The audio tells you the character of each space before you have time to look around. The fountain, dry and silent, sits near the entrance. Its absence of water sound is itself a sound design choice. Every other fountain in the game world that has running water is heard before it is seen. The silence of this fountain, in a place where a sound should be, is a specific kind of quietness. It is the sound of something that has stopped. Chapter 18. Item Provenance and the School's Lost Catalogue. Every item found in and around Byrgenwerth arrived there through a chain of events that the lore partially describes and partially obscures. Tracing those chains reveals the school's history more precisely than any single item description does alone. The Augur of Ebrietas is a hunter's tool, but it is found in the lecture building rather than in Byrgenwerth itself. This displacement is significant. The Augur was developed as the first choir tool, meaning it was created after the church separated from the school. That it appears in the nightmare echo of Byrgenwerth rather than in the school itself says something about the timing of its creation. It was made at the moment of transition, and the nightmare preserved it at that transitional point. The sedatives found in Byrgenwerth are used to reduce frenzy. Their presence in the school suggests that Byrgenwerth anticipated frenzy as an occupational hazard. The scholars were not naive about what their work did to minds. They brought sedatives. They planned for the possibility of cognitive overload. The plan was not enough, but the preparation is telling. The numbing mist, which prevents enemies from healing during a fight, is found near the path to Byrgenwerth in the Forbidden Woods. Its description connects it to the workshops and the clinical tradition of combat preparation. The presence of this item near the school suggests hunters visited the area not just to reach Byrgenwerth, but to engage something near it. The numbing mist was needed for a specific encounter that the game does not explain. The pungent blood cocktail found in the Forbidden Woods section near Byrgenwerth's approach is used to attract and distract beasts. Hunters used it in this area. The beast attractant item near the path to a school of scholars implies that beast encounters in this corridor were frequent enough to justify carrying an item specifically for managing them. The Forbidden Woods were not just a barrier, they were an active threat requiring equipment. The twin bloodstones found in Byrgenwerth are relatively common drops. Bloodstone shards and twin shards are mid-tier upgrade materials. Their presence as found items in the school suggests the scholars were upgrading weapons, or that weapons were left behind during the transformation events. Mid-upgrade weapons, partially improved and then abandoned, are the material record of people who had plans they did not finish. The formless Odin rune, described in an earlier chapter, is found near the lecture building, but its lore points explicitly to Cainhurst and to the Great One Odin, who is associated with blood. Its discovery path runs through Byrgenwerth's academic tradition, because Carol transcribed it, and it is part of her rune system, but its content belongs to the blood philosophy. That Willem rejected. The rune is an artifact of the school that argues against the school's dominant theory. The Clawmark rune is found in a Chalice dungeon location connected to Yharnam adjacent beast culture, but it is also described as having been part of Carol's transcription work. The rune that encodes beast hunger was part of the system developed at a school that was trying to transcend beasthood. Carol transcribed the hunger of the thing her school was trying to leave behind. The comprehensiveness of the rune language is more disturbing for including that. The item communion is dropped by the enemies in specific zones of the Nightmare of Mensis, but its description attributes it to Byrgenwerth's tradition via Carol that the rune allowing more blood vials is found among the consequences of Mensis's ceremony in a nightmare space suggests the communion concept, the exchange relationship between humans and Great Ones went wrong in a very specific way at Mensis. The rune preserves the theory. The nightmare preserves the result of the theory being applied badly. The beast blood pellet, which temporarily increases rally potential and beast mode tendencies, is found in multiple locations throughout the game, including the Byrgenwerth. Approach. Its presence on the path to a school dedicated to transcending the beast suggests either that hunters who came this way used it to fight the Forbidden Wood's enemies, or that something about the environment near the school produced conditions where beast enhancement was useful. Either reading is strange. The fire paper found near Byrgenwerth in small supply is described as using church-developed arcane fire, not the arcane tradition of the school. The church tool being present in the school's environment suggests that after Byrgenwerth closed, church-affiliated hunters visited the area and left equipment behind. The school received traffic after its collapse. Someone from the church kept coming back. Chapter 19. The Thumerian Queen and What She Remembers. Yharnam, the Thumerian Queen, is encountered at the end of the deepest accessible Chalice dungeon chains, but her story is inseparable from Byrgenwerth's. The school found records of her. The church retrieved her artifacts. The umbilical cord that connects her to the game's true ending is the physical record of what was done to her and what she produced. The Queen does not fight you conventionally. Her attacks are slow and broadcast clearly. She uses a conjured scythe and blood manipulation. At moments during the fight, she appears to be reaching toward you with something other than aggression. The fight's visual language is ambivalent. She is dangerous, but the choreography does not feel hostile. Her pregnancy, which is visible and prominent during the fight, is the most directly disturbing element of her design. The game makes it visible from the first moment. Her transformation was not voluntary, was not the consequence of intellectual pursuit, was not a choice. The Thumerians subjected her to the rituals that produced Murgo, their attempt to create a viable connection between a human bloodline and a Great One. She is the cost of that experiment. The blood she controls in battle is her own. She is using what was done to her as a weapon. The blood manipulation attacks of the Queen are not a separate arcane ability. They are an expression of what her body contains. The Thumerian experiments that filled her bloodline with Great One adjacent blood gave her the capacity to weaponize that blood. It is not a superpower, it is a scar that became a survival mechanism. After you defeat her, She extends her hand upward, not toward you. Upward. In the direction of what is above the dungeon. Murgo is above, in the nightmare. She is reaching toward her child after death. That gesture, the last motion of an enemy who died for something she did not choose, is one of the most precisely economical pieces of emotional storytelling in the game. The blood she bleeds during the fight is different in colour from standard enemy blood. Slightly paler, the paler blood appears also in descriptions associated with the old blood and with Odon. The Queen's blood is identified by its colour as blood of the type that connects to the Great Ones. Even in its visual rendering, her blood is not quite human. The sound design of the Queen fight is unusually restrained. The music is quieter than boss fights at equivalent difficulty levels. The ambient sound of the deep dungeon continues beneath the fight music, rather than being replaced by it. The fight sounds like it is happening in a real space, rather than a staged arena. The Queen is encountered in her environment, not in a designed boss room. The item she drops, the umbilical cord, has a description that says only that it is a third of the umbilical cord of a stillborn child of a god. Stillborn. The child that the Thumerian rituals produced did not survive entry into the world. Murgo's cry, audible in the nightmare, is the crying of something that did not make it. The nightmare is what happens when a god's child dies, but refuses to stop existing. Byrgenwerth found the records of this. They found documentation of a civilization that attempted to produce a child of a great one, succeeded in some sense, failed in another, and was consumed by the consequences. They found these records, transcribed them, and the church used that transcription to try to produce the same result on purpose. The choir's attempt to recreate the Thumerian outcome with Ebrietas is the institutional repetition of the crime Byrgenwerth documented. They read the case study and decided to replicate the experiment. The Queen is the cautionary tale. The choir is the next chapter that ignores the caution. The dungeon architecture in the sections leading to the Queen uses a specific stone colour and texture that does not appear in any surface Yharnam building. The stone of the Queen's section of the labyrinth is distinct even from the general Chalice dungeon aesthetic. That section was built for her specifically, or around her specifically. The labyrinth shaped itself to what it contained. Chapter 20. Michaelash and the degradation of inquiry. Michaelash, host of the nightmare, is the most vocal character in Bloodborne's lore, and the most comprehensively broken. He represents the endpoint of the scholarly tradition that Byrgenwerth started, filtered through Mensis's fanaticism, and preserved in a nightmare where he can never stop. His dialogue is not nonsense. It is damaged coherence. Each line Michaelash delivers was once a meaningful thought. The concepts he references grant us eyes ascend to your merciless lofts, the wisdom of the cold, deep sea, are all real elements of Bloodborne's cosmological framework. He understood these things once. He understands them still, in fragments. The nightmare has not taken his knowledge. It has taken his ability to process it into linear thought. The cage on his head is the most analysed piece of character design in the game. The cage was a Mensis tool. The scholars of Mensis performed a ceremony to contact a Great One, and they wore cages to contain their minds during the contact, to create a sealed internal space that the Great One could not fully enter. This implies they understood the risk. They knew that direct Great One contact meant loss of self. The cages were their protection. Michaelash still wears his cage. In the nightmare. When there is no ceremony happening, and no Great One to protect against, he keeps the cage on, because the nightmare is the contact. The ceremony succeeded. He is in continuous contact with Murgo. The cage is the only thing preventing total dissolution. He has been wearing it for an indeterminate amount of nightmare time, running through the same corridors, repeating the same fragments, and the cage is the only reason there is. Still a Michaelash to encounter. His running behaviour during the chase sequences is not cowardice in any simple sense. Mikuláš is not running away from you because he is afraid of you. He is running because movement is the only form of coherence he has left. When he stops and fights, he is also speaking, and his speech in those moments is more coherent than elsewhere. The fight moments are the moments when Mikuláš manages to collect himself, and they do not last. The room where you finally corner him has mirrors. He stands before a mirror and speaks the Augur of Ebrietas incantation in the context of his dialogue, "Make of our flesh a conduit." He is requesting a direct physical transformation into a Great One conduit. Standing in front of a mirror. The reflection he is looking at is either the self he wants to transform or the Great One he is trying to reach. Possibly both. The mirror also makes the fight mechanically interesting because you cannot always be certain which version of the room is the real one during the approach. Byrgenwerth built its philosophy on perception and the eye. Mikuláš's final room plays tricks with perception by introducing reflective surfaces in a nightmare space. The context makes it exactly the right setting. After you kill him, he says that it is time to find a new approach. The last words of a man who has been locked in one approach for an unknown duration, killed while performing it again, is that it is time to try something different. He knows. He knew. He just could not stop. The nightmare ran him on a loop, and he was aware enough to be horrified by it and not aware enough to break it. That is the most precise description of scholarly obsession Bloodborne offers. Mikuláš's robes are the mensis scholar robes, clearly derived from the same institutional tradition as the Byrgenwerth robes. The textile lineage is visible. The garment changed slightly in each generation as the institution changed, but the basic form, the scholar's robe for those who work in the liminal space between human knowledge. And cosmic contact is consistent from Byrgenwerth through to the nightmare where Mikuláš runs. The mensis cage item that you can equip on your head, wearing it gives you one level of insight but deals frenzy damage, is the most direct statement the game makes about what the mensis scholars were doing. You can know more, it will hurt you, and that is the deal. Byrgenwerth made the same deal. The only difference is that Byrgenwerth's version was slower. Chapter 21. The Doll and the Distance Between Things. The plain doll in the Hunter's Dream is made by Gehrman, is modelled after Maria, and is connected to Byrgenwerth through multiple chains. But the doll herself is worth examining separately because she is the character who interacts with the player most consistently, and the gap between her apparent warmth and her actual nature is one of Bloodborne's most carefully constructed uncanny effects. She was not always present in the dream. Gehrman was in the dream before she was. He built her, or the moon presence instantiated her from his grief, depending on how you read the lore. Either way, she came later. The first period of the Hunter's Dream was Gehrman alone, with the tools and the graves and the garden. And then he was not alone, and the not being alone was worse in its way than the solitude had been. The doll heals you. She takes your blood echoes and converts them into levels. She is the mechanism by which you become stronger. Every time you grow in the game, she is the conduit. The person who facilitates all your progress is a constructed object, is a grief object, is an effigy of a woman who left someone who loved her. The intimacy the game creates between the player and the doll is the intimacy of proximity to something that is not what it appears to be. Her dialogue never acknowledges her own nature explicitly. She never says that she knows she is not Maria. She never says that she knows she is made of wood and porcelain and Gehrman's longing, but several of her lines contain hesitations, qualifications, moments of almost awareness that players have catalogued extensively. She says she feels joy, but then qualifies it. She says she is here for you, but the here carries an uncertainty. The writing is precise about these small gaps. The gesture she makes when you approach her for leveling, extending her hand for the echoes, uses the same physical grammar as certain Great One encounter animations. Not identical, but in the same family. The doll was constructed by a man shaped by Byrgenwerth's era, and the gestures he built into her draw from the same visual language as the cosmic entities his generation encountered. Gehrman's love object carries the aesthetic marks of his trauma. When you kill the doll, her blood is white. This has been analysed at length. White blood appears in the game in connection with beings that are not human in the conventional sense, or that contain something other than human blood. The doll bleeds white. What is in her is not red. Whatever Gehrman put into her when he built her, whatever the moon presence added when it instantiated her, is not the same substance that runs through the hunters who come to her for healing. After killing the doll, she revives. You come back to the dream, and she is there again. She mentions, without accusation, that she felt something. This is the gentlest confrontation in a game full of confrontations, and it is devastating precisely because of that gentleness. She felt you kill her, and she has no framework for what that means for the relationship, so she simply reports the sensation and continues to help you. The doll's relationship to Maria exists in the lore as a haunting rather than a replacement. She is not Maria. She is not trying to be Maria. She is the shape of Maria, held in Gehrman's grief, performing a function that Gehrman needed something to perform. She exists in the space where Maria's absence was, and the space has been given form and warmth and white blood, and she stands in it and heals hunters. The doll's connection to Byrgenwerth is that she is the last human-shaped consequence of what the school set in motion. The school produced the hunting tradition. The tradition produced Gehrman. Gehrman's work produced Maria. Maria's tragedy produced the doll. The doll is the end of the chain that begins with Willem's epiphany about eyes. She is made of the grief that accumulated at the end of everything Byrgenwerth started. Chapter 22. The Mechanics as Metaphysics. The insight system in Bloodborne is the most sophisticated mechanical implementation of a lore concept in the From software catalogue. It deserves its own sustained analysis, because understanding it fully is understanding what Byrgenwerth was actually after, and what that actually costs. At zero insight, the world is what it appears to be. Yharnam is a blighted city with a plague and hostile citizens. The enemies are beasts and armed humans. The architecture is gothic and decayed. The experience is dark but coherent. At 1 to 2 insight, the first shift occurs. You can hear Murgo crying. The crying baby sound that appears on gaining a point of insight is audible before you understand why it is there. Byrgenwerth researchers began hearing things they could not explain. The crying is the first thing that cannot be accounted for by the visible world. At higher insight, the amygdala that grasp at lamps and door frames throughout the game become visible. They were always there. At low insight, you cannot perceive them. They reach through the architecture of Yharnam. Enormous multi-limbed entities visible only to those who have accumulated enough perception. They are not new. You are new to the awareness of them. Willem would have recognized this experience. He would have known what the additional perception meant. He spent his life trying to give people this ability, and he understood that it was transformative, and that the transformation was not comfortable. The insight system is the player experiencing Willem's thesis directly. At maximum insight, the celestial emissary appears in the Hemwick Charnel Lane area, where enemies normally cluster. Only at maximum insight. The addition of a Great One adjacent entity to an area at maximum perception directly demonstrates the threshold effect Willem theorized. Enough eyes and the divine becomes visible. The game is not describing this. The game is making it happen to you. The frenzy mechanic, which drains your health rapidly when exposed to insight-threatening stimuli, is the downside of accumulated perception. Frenzy is what happens when you see more than you can integrate. The scholars who transformed were experiencing frenzy in its chronic form. The single encounter frenzy that the player manages with sedatives and the deep sea rune is the acute version of what the scholars experience continuously until it restructured them. The hunter's dream is only accessible because the player carries the moon presence's mark. That mark is a function of insight. Zero insight characters in the game's lore context cannot access the dream. The entire hunting apparatus, the workshop, the doll, the safety of Dream Death Revival, is gated on perception. You can only use the system Byrgenwerth's tradition built if you have already crossed the threshold Byrgenwerth was trying to reach. The blood echoes that function as currency and experience are described as remnants of the soul-adjacent energy that humans contain. Every enemy's echoes are the compressed record of their experience. When you consume a madman's knowledge item, which provides insight directly, you are consuming the cognitive residue of someone whose insight was fatal. The mechanic of eating someone's skull fragment to get smarter is more conceptually elaborate than most games' entire design philosophies. The 3 umbilical cords required for the true ending function within this system as the final insight threshold. Consuming all 3 gives you a specific amount of insight and unlocks the capacity to resist the moon presence's ending offer. The cords are lore objects, but they are also mechanical keys. The game requires that you achieve a specific perception level to access its true conclusion. You have to have seen enough to earn the right to see the last thing. The ending, where you become the new Great One, is the endpoint of Willem's philosophy enacted by the player. More eyes, more perception, more insight. Ascension. The scholars who transformed into spider creatures were going the same direction, but without sufficient preparation, without the umbilical cord threshold, without the specific journey that gives the insight meaning rather than just volume. The true ending is Byrgenwerth's project completed correctly. Everything else in the game is documentation of what happens when it goes wrong. Chapter 23. What the community built. The lore community around Bloodborne has, in the decades since the game's release, produced a body of secondary scholarship that is itself a kind of Byrgenwerth, patient observers, working carefully with incomplete materials, generating competing interpretations, revising conclusions when evidence demands it. The parallel is not accidental. The game attracted people who worked the way Byrgenwerth scholars were supposed to work, before the haste and the ambition took over. The major lore contributors to Bloodborne's community developed methodologies. It was not enough to read item descriptions. The methodology that emerged demanded cross-referencing every item description with the Japanese source text, tracking enemy placement relative to lore events, analysing texture. Work for narrative content, comparing patch versions for changes, and treating the architecture as a primary document. This is genuine close reading applied to a game. The debates in the community about Byrgenwerth, specifically, have produced frameworks that sophisticated literary critics would recognise. The question of whether Willem is ultimately sympathetic is a character study argument with textual evidence on both sides. The question of whether the moon presence was influencing the school's research is a question about narrative determinism and character agency. These are real interpretive problems being worked through with real intellectual rigour. The wiki pages for Byrgenwerth have been edited more times than any comparable section of the game's wiki. The edit history documents disagreements, corrections, the arrival of new evidence from data mining, revisions following Japanese text comparisons, arguments about the direction of influence in specific lore chains. The wiki is a living document in exactly the way Byrgenwerth's books were living documents, being annotated and disputed and revised by people who care about getting it right. The speedrunning community interacted with the Byrgenwerth area differently, but their interaction also produced lore-relevant discoveries. The specific positions of enemies that could be bypassed, the geometry of the spider scholars that allowed certain skips, the precise hitbox of the fog gate leading to the lake.